Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Weather advisory remains in effect. Seek immediate shelter. Do not venture outside under any circumstances. Emergency services are temporarily unavailable due to severe conditions. I collapsed onto the worn leather couch, clutching a steaming mug of coffee. Well, this is just perfect timing for our weekend getaway, isn't it? We're going to be trapped here for days. Could be worse, Michael said, flashing that crooked grin of his. Seriously though, I booked this lake house specifically for the view. Crystal clear water, mountains all around. Maybe spot some eagles or deer. Now look at this mess. I gestured toward the large windows. Everything outside was a wall of white, with only the ghostly outlines of pine trees visible through the swirling snow. Hey, at least we'll have a good story to tell when we get back to the city, Michael chuckled, settling down beside me. Crack! Sharp static burst from the old radio on the kitchen counter, followed by an urgent voice cutting through the interference. All residents must immediately cover windows and glass surfaces. I repeat, cover all windows and glass surfaces with opaque materials. I exchanged a puzzled look with Michael. He shrugged, raising an eyebrow. This includes basement windows, glass doors, skylights, and any other transparent openings. Use sheets, blankets, or boards if necessary. That's odd, I muttered. Probably worried about flying debris, Michael reasoned, standing up and walking to the window. You know how these mountain storms can get. Don't want branches smashing through the glass. He began pulling down the heavy curtains until the room was plunged into dim twilight. I'll find some lamps, I said, getting to my feet. Click. Darkness swallowed us whole. The power's out, I shouted into the black void. Great. Just fantastic. How are we supposed to heat this place? And what about our phones? They're almost dead, and now we can't charge them. Emily, relax. Come here, sit back down. Michael's voice came from somewhere near the couch. I saw some oil lamps in the kitchen earlier. And there's a fireplace, we'll be fine. Let me just find those lamps and toss that stupid radio outside where it belongs. Okay, fine, I sighed, feeling my way back to the couch. His footsteps faded toward the kitchen, leaving me alone in the growing darkness. The light filtering through the heavy curtains was fading fast, and the temperature was already dropping noticeably. The rustic decorations that had seemed so charming when we arrived now looked menacing in the shadows. A carved wooden eagle perched on the mantel seemed ready to swoop down at me, and the mounted antlers on the walls looked like medieval weapons waiting to strike anyone who passed too close. Hurry up in there, I called out, pulling a throw blanket tight around my shoulders. It's getting freezing without you here. Final emergency broadcast. The radio crackled back to life, the announcer's voice distorted by heavy static. Do not leave your location. Do not open doors or windows regardless of what you may hear outside. And whatever you do, do not. Static consume the rest. I grabbed the radio and shook it roughly. The signal's completely gone. Good riddance. Michael called back from the kitchen. Found the lamps, and some matches too. I turned the dial, searching for any other stations. Suddenly, a cheerful voice came through crystal clear. Emergency supply distribution is now active at the community center on Elm Street. We're providing bottled water, canned goods, warm blankets, and portable batteries. Michael rushed back into the room, carrying several oil lamps and looking confused. Wait, didn't they just say we shouldn't? I cranked up the volume. Please come collect your supplies as soon as possible. Limited quantities available. First come, first served. Update. I'll post more details tomorrow or Wednesday. For now, we're managing okay and trying to save phone battery. The oil lamp flames danced across the room, casting wild shadows that seemed to move independently on the walls. The cold settled deeper into the house, and I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself. So I've tried calling everyone I can think of, and every single number goes straight to voicemail, including my sister, and she literally never turns her phone off. I swirled the last drops of cold coffee in my mug, and there's absolutely nothing about any of this on the news websites. What does that tell us? That we're completely cut off, Michael said with a nervous laugh. That we're in serious trouble. Michael, sorry. Here, let me see if I can find anything online about what's happening. He pulled out his phone, the blue screen glowing starkly against the flickering firelight. Instead of checking regular news sites, I'm just going to search everything I can think of. Let's try Colorado. Emergency broadcast. Cover windows. This is taking forever. We're down to 2 bars. The flames crackled and popped in the fireplace. Got something, he said, thrusting the phone toward my face. I took it and began reading. Mountain Hiker 2021. Anyone else in Pine Ridge? Colorado getting weird radio broadcasts. They're telling everyone to lock up and cover windows. But now different stations are saying to come out and get supplies on Elm Street. What's going on here? Wilderness Guide Pro, the second broadcast is fake. It's been playing on loop across every local frequency for the past 8 hours. Sword Seeker guys, I've done extensive research, and something identical happened in the late 1970s. You can survive if you follow these essential rules. Never look at them. Never let them see you. Whether you're in a tent, car, or building, you can make it through. Just ensure every window and opening is covered with something they can't see through. Keep all animals inside, pets, livestock, everything. Don't put trash outside. Don't light fires. They can detect smoke from incredible distances. Michael and I stared at each other, then slowly turned our gaze toward the roaring fireplace. Thud. I jerked awake with a start. The blanket was twisted around my legs. My neck was stiff, and my hands felt like ice. The room was nearly pitch black now, with only dying embers glowing in the fireplace. Michael, he only responded with soft snoring. Michael, I hissed. What thud? Did you hear that sound? Probably just a tree branch falling. Don't worry about it. Thud. Thud, thud, thud. The impacts echoed throughout the house, seeming to come from all directions, the walls, the roof, everywhere. Michael bolted upright, fumbled for his glasses, and jumped off the couch. What in the world? Thump. Thump. Sharp, deliberate knocking at the front door. Don't answer it, Michael whispered, positioning himself between me and the door. Of course I'm not going to. Hello. Open this door immediately. A man's voice, loud and authoritative, cut through the howling wind outside. Police department. Open up right now. Michael hesitantly took a step toward the door. What are you doing? I whispered frantically. It's the police, Emily. It's a trap. I leaped up and grabbed his arm as he slowly walked down the hallway, away from the fire, away from any warmth. Remember what they said on the radio. Don't open the door no matter what you hear. He froze in front of the door, staring. A shadow fell across the sheet we had tacked over the door's window. At first glance, it appeared to be the silhouette of a normal person, a regular police officer. But the longer I studied it, the more wrong it seemed. The proportions were slightly off, the torso too narrow, the limbs too long, and the head tilted at an unnatural angle. This is the police. Open this door immediately, the voice boomed again. We have to let him in, Michael said, his eyes fixed on the covered window. Staring, at the corner where part of the sheet had come loose. I jumped in front of him. Do not open that door, Michael. It's not the police. It's one of them, whatever those things are. Emily, it's the police. He reached around me, past my waist, and yanked the door wide open. No, I screamed. For a moment, everything stopped. The howling wind filled the house. Snowflakes drifted inside, landing softly on the wooden floor. Michael stood motionless in the doorway, staring out into the storm. My mind was racing. He let them in. There's no going back now, no way to save us. We're going to die here, in this remote house, before anyone even knows we're missing. But then I knew what I had to do. I lunged forward, and with one swift motion, knocked his glasses clean off his face. Clatter. As the glasses hit the floor, the trance seemed to break. His blank expression transformed into pure terror. He grabbed the door frame and threw all his weight into closing it. Or tried to. Close it. Close it, I screamed. I can't, he yelled back. Something's pushing from the other side. I'm not strong enough. Crash. The sound of shattering glass from deep inside the house. Too late, I screamed, pulling at his arm. They're already inside. Close your eyes, he shouted. What are you doing? Just trust me. Creak. Thump, thump, thump. I heard the door slam open, and the sound of heavy, rapid footsteps. Michael grabbed my wrist and pulled me forward. I felt furniture scraping against me, decorations brushing my face, and various obstacles bumping into me as we stumbled through the darkness. Some of them felt disturbingly warm. Jingle, jingle. The sound of car keys. Then I was yanked out into the bitter cold. Snowflakes stung my face, and my ankles burned in the deep snow. I stumbled through it, crying and terrified, but kept moving until I felt familiar car seats under my hands. I've got you, Michael said, helping me into the passenger seat. Slam. The engine roared to life. The car lurched forward, then swerved onto the road. Thank God for all-wheel drive, he muttered. Oh, and you can open your eyes now, but won't I see them? I don't see any on the road right now, he said. I opened my eyes. The scene wasn't much different from the darkness behind my eyelids, except for our headlights. The night was absolutely black, broken only by the white beams cutting through the storm. Dark trees lined both sides of the road, reaching up toward the starless sky. and countless points of light glittered in the branches, hovering motionless like suspended jewels. No, not jewels. Eyes, hundreds of eyes, watching us from the treetops. Thump, thump, dark shapes began dropping from the trees like enormous raindrops. The car surged forward, racing over the blanket of snow. "They're in the road," I screamed. "What? Where?" "Everywhere." "Can't you see them?" "Of course I can't see them. I can barely make out the road." You knocked my glasses off, remember. The shadows moved closer, darting in and out of our headlight beams. I squeezed my eyes shut tight. "We're safe," I told myself. "We're in a car, protected by metal and glass." Even that sword seeker guy online said you're safe in a vehicle. The car swerved violently, but that's only if they haven't already seen you. The car lurched again. My head struck the window. The engine roared as Michael muttered desperately under his breath, "Come on, come on. Why are we slowing down?" "I don't know," Michael said, panic creeping into his voice. "Everything seems to be working fine. The snow isn't deep enough to stop us." Ar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar. The sound of tires spinning uselessly against the snow. I think they're stopping us somehow. Even with my eyes closed, I could sense them. Their eyes glittering in our headlights like fresh snow. Their forms nothing more than shadows or wisps of smoke. And after they finished with us, their new shapes twisted into eerie, distorted versions of ourselves. Tap, tap, tap. They were at the windows now. How long before they broke through, just like they had at the house? Minutes, seconds. The wheels stopped spinning. Click. Michael shifted into park. "What are you doing?" "I have an idea." I opened my eyes, shielding my view of the forest with my hand. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the book of matches. Fizz. He struck a match. The flame flickered to life, and thin wisps of smoke drifted toward the ceiling. "Wait, won't that attract more of them?" "Exactly," he whispered. "No." My heart began pounding. I trusted him. I let him pull me through the snow. Pull me into this car. Pull me to my death, trapped here while they closed in around us. It wasn't him. It was one of them. "What did you do to Michael?" "You killed him, didn't you?" "What are you talking about? You're leading them straight to us." "You said so yourself, not leading them to us. Leading them to me." He dropped the burned out match and struck another. "Fizz, I'm going to run out there with this flame. Hopefully they'll all follow me. Then you're going to drive as far away from here as you can." "Oh," I shook my head, confused. "Wait, that doesn't make sense. How am I supposed to drive with my eyes closed? If we're lucky, they'll all follow me, and you won't need to worry about that. But you'll die. If we stay here and do nothing, we'll both die." The metal groaned and creaked as they worked to tear it apart. The tap-tap-tapping echoed across the windows like a countdown clock. I knew he was right. "I love you, Michael. I love you too, Emily." The door swung open. In my peripheral vision, I saw his feet disappearing into the shadows, heard the creatures moving, thumping away from the car, following him through the snow. Ee. A piercing shriek, and involuntarily I looked up. Michael was standing 20 feet from the car, holding the burning match. But the figures weren't chasing after him. They were running away. Within seconds, the forest fell silent again. Snow drifted peacefully to the ground. The The trees stood motionless as statues, and the branches above were dark, no glittering white eyes anywhere. I threw open the door and ran to him. "They're afraid of fire," was all he could manage to say. After holding him for what felt like hours, I realized how little sense that made. But wait, that sword seeker guy said they were attracted to fire, attracted to smoke. Why would he tell everyone that? Maybe he didn't know. Or my voice caught as the realization hit me. Maybe he had already seen one of them. Maybe he was speaking for them. But then why would he also tell everyone to stay inside and cover their windows? Maybe we weren't supposed to stay inside. Maybe being trapped in our houses, waiting out the storm, is exactly what they wanted. Michael looked at me, his eyes wide in the darkness. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe the second radio message was the one we should have believed." We rushed back to the car. I jammed the keys into the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life. "We're going to Elm Street." When we turned onto Elm Street, an extraordinary sight greeted us. A modest house sat at the edge of the forest. It was surrounded by dozens of small bonfires, their smoke trails merging into one massive column that rose toward the sky. Several people stood in the yard, and a few began pointing and waving as we approached. As we parked, a dark-haired woman jogged over to us. "Please stand over here to the side. We need to test you first." She lifted her handheld radio. "Two more just arrived. Test us. We need to make sure you haven't been compromised, ma'am." We stood awkwardly in the yard, the fires hot against our backs. "Maybe this was a mistake," Michael whispered. "Are we sure we should?" "Hey there," a heavy-set man approached us. He wore faded jeans and an oversized flannel shirt with a large tear across the chest. "Let me just run a quick test on you folks, and we'll get you settled." He pulled a flashlight from his pocket, shined it in our eyes, asked us several questions, then called over. "Nancy, they're clear." She motioned for us to come inside. "Please make yourselves comfortable. Have some food. Take whatever supplies you need. We have plenty." Not many people have made it here. We were too late intercepting the false alert, it seems. "What are they?" "Those things in the forest," Michael asked. "Are we actually safe here?" I added. She didn't answer. Instead, she led us to a table loaded with sandwiches and hurried away. Michael and I grabbed plates and some food, then joined one of the tables. Across from us sat a teenager, chin propped on his hand, pushing potato salad around on his plate. "Why won't they tell us anything?" I said to Michael quietly. "And how did they organize this so quickly?" Michael replied. "Firewood, a backup generator, tons of food. It's like this has happened before, and they were prepared." It has happened before. We looked up. The teenager was staring at us, a slight smile on his lips. "My grandfather told me it happened back in the 70s, during a massive blizzard, and they've been ready ever since." "So what are they?" Michael asked, a bit too loudly. From across the room, the heavy-set man shot us a warning look. "I've heard people call them frost wraiths," he replied with a shrug. "But who really knows what they are? Shapeshifters, spirits, demons, we could call them anything." "What I don't understand," Michael said, after taking a long sip of soda, "is why they wanted us to cover the windows. Don't they want us to see them? Windows covered or not, they'll find ways to lure you out. They're experts at that. We had one outside my bedroom window last night, speaking in my grandmother's voice. telling Grandpa she wanted to come home. Luckily, I interrupted before it got to him. But why cover the windows? Oh, well, sunlight destroys them, just like fire does. That's why they only come out during blizzards. She lowered her voice and glanced around the room. They want houses to be completely safe for them. Because afterward, they want to live in them, nest in them, turn them into their own little dens. But why? I asked. This is just my theory, but I think they don't want to stay confined to the wilderness. They want to take over this entire town, one house at a time, moving from house to house under cover of darkness until everything's been taken over. And then, but at that moment, the heavyset man stormed over. "Jake, that's enough," he said, placing a hand on the teenager's shoulder. He looked at us and rolled his eyes. This kid loves spinning wild stories. "Sorry if it worried you folks." "No problem at all," I said with a forced smile. Jake sighed and stood up. Tom removed his hand from Jake's shoulder. His shirt shifted, causing the tear to open wider, exposing part of his chest. My heart began racing. Underneath was a tattoo of a sword embedded in stone. Of Excalibur. "He's one of them. What are you talking about?" "He's the sword seeker guy. The one who said they're attracted to fire. He has a huge tattoo of a sword in a stone on his chest. But he can't be one of the frost wraiths. We're surrounded by fire. He's not one of them. He's under their influence." I stood up and scanned the room. Wait, where had he gone? Jake was standing by the food table, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. But he was alone, and there was no sign of Tom anywhere. "Jake, where's your grandfather?" I called, rushing over to him. He shrugged. "No clue. This is extremely important. We think he might be compromised," Michael said bluntly. "What?" Jake shouted. "No way. Absolutely not. Jake, this is really critical." Anger flashed across his face, and his voice rose to a shout. "I saved him. When I walked in, he was about to look out the window, but I stopped him. Just in time. Maybe he had already looked," I said gently. He hesitated. Fear flickered across his features. But then he yelled, "Stop making things up. My grandfather is perfectly fine." "Emily," Michael was pointing toward the window. Outside, the orange glow was fading rapidly. Where fires had once blazed, there were only dark piles of ash. Over one of the remaining fires hovered a figure, holding something large and metallic. A bucket. Hiss. Water splashed over the flames. They sputtered, sparked, and died. The shadows began to shift and swirl, racing toward the house. One leaped forward, its mouth stretching wider and wider. "They're coming," I shouted. He put out the fires. "They're coming." In one swift motion, it engulfed Tom in black smoke. As quickly as it had happened, the smoke cleared. Tom stood rigidly by the extinguished fire, his head hanging at an odd angle. Then he began walking toward the house, his movements mechanical and unnatural. They followed behind him, their faces. Michael yanked the curtains closed. The quiet house erupted into chaos. Footsteps thundered, dishes crashed, people screamed. And a disturbingly familiar sound joined the mayhem. Tap, tap, tap. They were here, and we were in complete chaos. Running, pushing, screaming. We were all going to die in this house if someone didn't take charge. "Follow me," I called out above the panic. I raced toward the basement door. The thunder of footsteps followed me, shaking the wooden stairs. Damp, musty air washed over our faces. Click! A bare bulb flickered on overhead, bathing us all in weak yellow light. "What's the plan?" Michael asked me. "We wait here until morning." I took off my jacket and hung it over the small window. "The storm will be over and the sun will be out." "Yeah, unless they get to us before then," Jake interrupted. His eyes were wet with tears, his voice trembling. And why was his head tilted at that strange angle? "You saw what they did." "To Grandpa, trust me," I said firmly. "This will work, I promise." But now others had overheard, and panic spread through the room. "That woman's right," someone called from the gray shadows of the basement. "If they get in upstairs, they'll easily break down this old door. Then we're trapped here like animals ready for slaughter. They won't break down the door. They can break glass, yes, but not solid wood." "Emily, if they can stop a moving car," Michael whispered, his face hidden in shadows, "don't you think they can break down a door?" Another voice joined in, coming from the silhouette of an elderly woman. Her posture was strangely hunched, and her eyes glittered in the dim light. "We're sitting ducks down here. We need to go back upstairs." "Yes." "We have to go back upstairs. Absolutely. No." They had all seen the shadows. Every single one of them. "We need to stay here." "Don't you understand?" I screamed. "This is where we have to be." Silence filled the basement. Then Jake raised his arm and pointed directly at me. "She saw them, didn't she?" Michael stared at me, tears forming in his eyes, reflecting the dim light. I thought I closed the curtain in time, but I must have been too late. Someone grabbed my arms. Another person tilted my face toward the light. Jake leaned over me, his expression twisted with concern. "Her pupils aren't responding to the light. That means—" "I'm so sorry." I struggled and squirmed, trying to break free. "Let me go," I cried. "Please let me go." Click. The door opened. They dragged me upstairs. "Wait, where are you taking her?" Michael yelled. "You can't do this. There has to be a way to break the trance, right?" She did it with me. Knocked off my glasses, and, "Sure, if you want to cut out her eyes so she can't see anymore," the man holding me spat. "Michael, don't let them take me. Please." Thump. My eyes fluttered open. Complete darkness. Those people must have thrown me out into the forest. And now I'm here in the darkness with the frost wraiths. My heart started pounding. Am I one of them now? A drifting, demonic shadow with glittering white eyes. No, wait. The last thing I remember was someone mentioning cutting out my eyes. A sliver of light appeared. The door creaked open. "How are you feeling, Michael?" I tried to stand and couldn't. "Sorry about that," he said. I looked down to find thick rope wrapped around me, binding me to a chair. "They were going to throw you outside, but I managed to convince them to lock you in here instead." He rubbed his bruised knuckles. "Is everyone okay?" "Yeah. Except for Jake's grandfather." He knelt down and began working on the knots. "The sun came up a couple of hours ago, and it looks like the shadows are gone." "But what about everything that happened?" Jake poked his head in. "The officials want to speak with you," he said to Michael. "Oh, Emily, you're all right." "I am," I said, smiling at him. "Wait, what officials?" "Some government-looking people." They showed up this morning, said they're conducting area sanitization. I think that dark-haired woman Nancy is one of them. The rope came undone, and I stood up. They're making everyone sign all sorts of documents. Non-disclosure agreements saying we can't talk to reporters or anyone. I don't think I want to talk to anyone for a long time, he laughed. You and me both. Later that day, we drove the 8 hours back to the city. We spent the rest of our vacation indoors, catching up on sleep, relaxation, and each other's company. Life has been pretty normal since then, and we've been enjoying ourselves. Except sometimes, I see two glittering eyes in the woods behind our apartment building, and I feel the urge to open the door. Sophie Chen carefully adjusted her wool beanie as she navigated the pristine corridors of Riverside Preparatory Academy, keeping her gaze firmly fixed on the polished marble floors to avoid the stares and whispered comments that seemed to follow her like persistent shadows. The morning announcement had barely finished echoing through the halls when Headmaster Thompson's voice crackled over the intercom system, informing the student body that 8th grader Lily Morrison had failed to return home the previous evening, and requesting anyone with information to come forward immediately. 48 hours later, the organized search parties had withdrawn from the woodland areas surrounding the school. Police questioning had expanded to neighboring communities, and Lily's cheerful school photograph smiled hauntingly from missing person posters plastered throughout Yorkshire County. It was then that Sophie discovered the silver locket, the very same piece of jewelry that Lily had mockingly waved in front of her face, while calling her Baldy just days earlier, carefully concealed behind a loose stone in the abandoned North Wing restroom. Something deep within her chest turned to ice as Sophie realized she might be the only person capable of saving the girl who had systematically made her existence a living nightmare for the past 3 years. Yorkshire, with its rolling hills and historic stone cottages, had always prided itself on being the sort of place where such terrible things simply did not occur. The local newspaper rarely reported anything more serious than village fairs or the occasional planning dispute. Riverside Preparatory Academy stood as the crown jewel of this idyllic community, a prestigious independent school housed in a magnificent Victorian building that had educated the children of England's upper classes for over a century. Sophie Chen had never quite belonged in this polished world. At 13 years old, she possessed an intelligence that made adults uncomfortable and a medical condition that made her peers cruel. Loose anagen syndrome had left her with fine, fragile hair that fell out in clumps at the slightest disturbance. What remained grew unevenly across her scalp in thin, patchy sections that no amount of careful styling could effectively disguise. Her dark eyes, set in a delicate face that seemed too serious for someone so young, appeared to absorb everything while revealing nothing. Years ago, Lily Morrison had actually been Sophie's closest friend. They had first met in reception class, before appearances held such significance, bonding over shared crayons and an enthusiasm for constructing elaborate fantasy worlds with their toys. However, year 4 had altered everything fundamentally. Lily, with her perfect golden ringlets and newly acquired designer uniforms, had been absorbed into Riverside's social elite, an exclusive circle led by Charlotte Whitfield and Grace Hamilton. whose fathers served on the school governing body and whose mothers chaired every significant committee in the district. Sophie's home environment offered little refuge from the isolation she experienced at school. Her parents, Dr. Michael Chen, a distracted neurosurgeon, and Sarah Chen, a meticulously organized interior designer, had separated 8 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences that everyone in the community understood stemmed from the overwhelming stress of raising a child with such a rare and visible condition. Sophie now divided her time between her father's sterile city apartment and her mother's immaculate Georgian townhouse, carrying her treasured journal between them. This leather-bound notebook served as her sanctuary, where she recorded her observations about the people around her with an unsettling degree of perceptiveness. Mrs. Williams, Sophie's Year 4 teacher, had recognized something extraordinary in her quiet student's understanding of human behavior. Mr. Davies, the elderly school caretaker whose own granddaughter had battled leukemia years earlier, would secretly slip Sophie biscuits when he discovered her hiding in the library during break times. These small acts of kindness stood out brilliantly against the backdrop of whispers and pointed stares that had become Sophie's daily reality, long before Lily Morrison vanished without a trace. The day Lily disappeared had begun like any other Wednesday. Sophie had arrived early, as was her custom, to avoid the crowded buses and hallways where encounters with her classmates were unavoidable. She had settled into her familiar corner of the library, absorbed in a mystery novel about famous detectives, when she noticed Lily and her group huddled near the reference section, casting glances in her direction while suppressing giggles behind cupped hands. "She's absolutely disgusting," Lily had whispered, not quite softly enough. "My mother says it might be contagious or something." The words had stung with their familiar precision, but Sophie had trained herself not to react visibly. She had simply turned the page. Even as her vision blurred with tears, she refused to allow herself to shed. Later, during mathematics class, Sophie had felt something strike the back of her head. A folded piece of paper landed on the floor beside her desk. She discreetly unfolded it to discover a crude drawing of a bald stick figure surrounded by falling hair strands, with the words, "Baldy Chen contaminating our school," scrawled beneath it in purple ink. When she glanced up, Lily had quickly averted her gaze, but not before Sophie caught an expression that seemed almost uncertain, perhaps even guilty. At lunch, Sophie had retreated to her usual hiding spot, a bench partially concealed behind the science building, where she ate alone and wrote in her journal. The entry from that particular day, which police investigators would later read with raised eyebrows, simply noted, "Lily seemed different today. Anxious, kept checking her mobile phone constantly, and jumped when Charlotte asked about her father's recent business meetings. Something is definitely wrong, but not my concern." The final bell had rung at 3:15 in the afternoon. Sophie had watched from her classroom window as Lily climbed into what appeared to be her mother's gleaming Range Rover, instead of taking her usual position on the netball court for after-school practice. By 9:30 that evening, Mrs. Morrison's frantic telephone call to the police had set a chain of events into motion that would transform their quiet community forever. The first 24 hours had completely transformed Yorkshire's peaceful atmosphere. Police vehicles crawled through residential streets, with searchlights scanning manicured gardens and ancient hedgerows. Volunteers gathered in the school car park, organizing themselves into search parties that methodically combed through woodlands and parks. Lily's radiant smile, captured in the previous year's school portrait with her hair perfectly styled, and her braces catching the camera flash, appeared on hastily printed flyers and local television news reports. Sophie had observed it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment that adults later misinterpreted as shock. When two officers had arrived to interview her, explaining it was standard procedure to speak with all of Lily's classmates, Sophie had answered their questions in careful, measured responses. "When did you last see Lily?" the female constable had asked gently. "Mathematics class," Sophie had replied. Then again at dismissal, did she mention any plans? Anyone she might be meeting? No. Did she seem upset or worried about anything? Sophie had hesitated thoughtfully. She seemed nervous somehow. The male officer had leaned forward with interest. Nervous how? Just different. Checking her phone frequently, jumpy. They had exchanged meaningful glances, made notes, and moved on, clearly categorizing Sophie as unlikely to possess useful information. After all, everyone knew that Sophie Chen and Lily Morrison were hardly friends. What could the strange, nearly bald girl possibly know about the popular netball captain's disappearance? The whispers had intensified on the second day. Sophie had felt them like physical touches as she walked through the unusually subdued hallways. "I heard they discovered her rucksack near the river. My father says the police suspect she might have run away. Perhaps it was that creepy maintenance worker who always watches the girls during sports practice." And then, more disturbingly, Sophie was probably the last person who hated Lily enough to actually do something about it. Headmaster Thompson had called a special assembly. With grave expressions, the faculty had assured the students that everything humanly possible was being done to locate their missing classmate. Counselors were available for anyone requiring emotional support. Classes would continue as normally as circumstances permitted. For Sophie, nothing felt remotely normal. The sudden absence of Lily's systematic torment created a peculiar vacuum that somehow felt worse than the actual bullying. The weight of unfinished business hung heavily in the air between them, like a conversation abruptly cut short, a conflict without any resolution. That night, alone in her bedroom at her father's apartment, while he worked yet another late shift at the hospital, Sophie had reached a decision. She opened her journal to a fresh page and wrote a single, determined sentence. "I am going to find Lily Morrison." It was not forgiveness driving her, nor even basic kindness. It was something far more complicated, a sense that she and Lily were connected by more than their mutual animosity. The nervous glances and the hesitation before that final cruel comment might have signified something important. Besides, Sophie reasoned as she finally drifted off to sleep, who better to locate someone than the person who had spent years meticulously observing their every movement, cataloging their habits, and mapping their social world simply in order to survive it. The silver locket had been Lily's most prized possession, a delicate chain adorned with charms marking every achievement in her carefully curated existence. A tiny netball for making the junior team, a miniature crown for winning the Young Miss Yorkshire pageant, a sparkling letter L encrusted with what Lily claimed were genuine diamonds. Sophie had memorized each charm during the countless times Lily had dangled it mockingly before her face, using it as a prop in her performances of social superiority. Discovering it abandoned in the Old North Wing lavatory, a section of the school that had been closed for extensive renovation work, sent a cold wave of certainty through Sophie that this was no ordinary disappearance. Lily Morrison would sooner part with her right arm than this precious locket. Sophie had discovered it purely by chance, having ducked into the forbidden area to escape Charlotte and Grace, who had seemed determined to fill Lily's bullying role in her absence. The loose stone had caught her attention only because her beanie had snagged on a protruding nail as she crouched in hiding, forcing her to examine the crumbling wall more closely. Sophie had stared at the locket for several long moments before carefully wrapping it in a tissue and placing it in her rucksack, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. Why would Lily have been in the abandoned wing at all? Who had hidden the locket there? Most troubling of all, was Lily hiding something herself? Or was someone else hiding Lily? "You shouldn't be in here, young miss." The gravelly voice had nearly stopped Sophie's heart completely. She whirled around to discover Mr. Davies, the caretaker, standing in the doorway with his mop and cleaning bucket. "This area is strictly off limits. Asbestos concerns and such." Instead of immediately reporting her presence, however, Mr. Davies had studied her pale face with obvious concern. "You found something, didn't you?" Perhaps it was his kind eyes, or perhaps it was simply that Sophie had reached the absolute limit of secrets she could carry alone, but she had shown him the locket. "Lily Morrison's," he had said immediately, recognizing it without hesitation. Where was it hidden? Behind that loose stone, Sophie had pointed. "Mr. Davies, I think someone placed it there deliberately." The old caretaker had nodded slowly, his weathered face serious. 4 nights ago, I was locking up late and saw lights in this wing. Thought it might be those secondary school students who sometimes break in to drink alcohol. But when I came to investigate, I heard voices, a man and a girl. Could not make out what they were discussing. By the time I reached here, they had gone. Did you inform the police?" Sophie had asked, her heart pounding rapidly. "Tried to. Spoke to that young Constable Jenkins, I think. He just wrote it down and said they would look into it properly." Mr. Davies had sighed deeply. "Don't think they took it seriously. An old man's imagination, they probably figured. Was it Lily's voice you heard? Could not say for certain, but now finding this." He gestured toward the locket. "You should take this directly to Chief Inspector Williams immediately." Sophie had clutched the locket tighter. "He's Grace's father. He barely listened to me when they interviewed Lily's classmates. He thinks I'm—" She had not finished the sentence, but Mr. Davies had understood perfectly. "Different," he had supplied gently. "And grown-ups don't always listen to different, do they?" That afternoon, Sophie had attempted to report her discovery anyway. She had gone directly to the police station after school, the locket safely wrapped in her pocket. Chief Inspector Williams had kept her waiting for nearly an hour before finally ushering her into his office, where he had listened with thinly veiled impatience to her account. "And you just happened to discover this locket hidden in a section of the school that is strictly forbidden to students?" he had asked, his tone making it abundantly clear what he thought of her story. I was hiding from some girls who were bothering me, Sophie had explained, her voice small but steady. I see. And you are absolutely certain this belongs to Lily Morrison. Everyone knows her locket. She wears it every single day. Chief Inspector Williams had sighed heavily, placing the locket in an evidence bag with a deliberateness that suggested he was merely humoring her. Sophie, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but we have experienced officers working this case. We have already searched the school thoroughly, including the north wing. But did you check behind the loose stones? And Mr. Davies saw Mr. Davies has already provided his statement. The chief inspector had interrupted curtly. Now I think it is time you left this investigation to the professionals and focused on your schoolwork. Sophie had left the police station feeling smaller than when she had entered, but also more determined than ever. The dismissal had solidified something within her, a conviction that the adults were missing crucial pieces of this puzzle that only she could perceive. That evening, alone in her room at her mother's house, Sophie had opened her journal and begun to create a comprehensive map of everything she knew about Lily Morrison. Where she went after school, which teachers she spoke to most frequently, the names of the sixth form boys she had boasted about texting, the routes she took through the school to avoid certain classrooms, the times she had mentioned her father's business trips with an odd catch in her voice. Sophie had always been naturally observant. It was a survival skill in her world. But now she channeled that ability with laser precision. She created a detailed timeline of Lily's final day at school, noting every interaction, every unusual behavior pattern. On a fresh page, she listed all the adults who possessed access to the North Wing: maintenance staff, administrators, the renovation crew. One name had immediately jumped out at her: Mr. Reynolds, chairman of the school governing body, whose construction company had been awarded the renovation contract. The same Mr. Reynolds whose daughter Caitlin had transferred schools abruptly the previous year, after months of increasingly erratic behavior. The same Mr. Reynolds who had once witnessed Lily and her friends tormenting Sophie in the dining hall, and had simply walked away, despite being a mandatory reporter of bullying incidents. Follow the secrets, Sophie had written in large letters at the bottom of the page. It had become crystal clear to her that if she wanted to find Lily Morrison, she would need to do what she had always done best: watch, listen, and move invisibly through the world that had tried so desperately to pretend she did not exist. Sophie began her investigation with methodical precision. The following morning, she arrived at school a full hour before the first bell, her journal tucked safely in her rucksack, alongside a small digital camera her father had given her for her previous birthday. A peace offering he had hoped might interest her in something normal like photography. Today, it would serve an entirely different purpose. The school was eerily quiet at 7:15 in the morning, with only a handful of teachers preparing in their classrooms and the custodial staff completing their morning routines. Sophie slipped into the main office, where Miss Thompson, the elderly secretary who had always shown her distracted kindness, was sorting through the morning post. "Good morning, Sophie," Miss Thompson said, peering over her reading glasses. "You are here remarkably early. I am helping Mrs. Williams with a project," Sophie lied smoothly, having anticipated this question. "Do you have the visitor log from last week?" She asked me to copy down when the museum representatives visited. Miss Thompson hesitated only briefly before sliding a thick binder across the counter. Just be quick about it, dear. That is not really meant for student eyes. Sophie flipped through the pages until she located what she was searching for. The log entries from the day Lily had disappeared. She snapped a quick photograph with her camera, then returned the binder with a polite thank you before hurrying out. In the empty girls' lavatory, she reviewed the photograph. Among the routine parent visits and delivery signatures was an unexpected entry. David Reynolds, 2:45 in the afternoon, meeting with Headmaster Thompson. The timing struck Sophie as highly significant. Mr. Reynolds had been in the building just 30 minutes before Lily had left with her mother, or someone they had all assumed was her mother. Sophie recalled the dismissal scene again. The Black Range Rover pulling up, Lily climbing in without her usual animated chatter with friends. Had anyone actually seen Mrs. Morrison's face behind the wheel? During morning lessons, Sophie struggled to concentrate, her mind constantly returning to the growing web of connections she was forming. At lunch, instead of retreating to her solitary bench, she positioned herself at an empty table with a clear view of the staff room. She pretended to read while observing the adults coming and going, noting their groupings and conversations in her journal. Mrs. Williams emerged from the staff room alone, looking deeply troubled. The young Year 4 teacher had always been kind to Sophie, defending her when other teachers dismissed her quietness as antisocial behavior. On impulse, Sophie gathered her belongings and followed her teacher down the corridor. Mrs. Williams, Sophie called softly. The teacher turned, surprise registering clearly on her face. Sophie, is everything quite all right? Sophie hesitated, then decided to take a significant chance. Can I talk to you about Lily Morrison? Something flickered in Mrs. Williams' eyes, concern perhaps, or weariness. She glanced around the empty hallway before nodding. Come into my classroom. Once inside with the door firmly closed, Mrs. Williams sat at her desk and gestured for Sophie to take a student chair. What about Lily did you want to discuss? I found her silver locket, Sophie said simply, watching her teacher's reaction carefully. In the north wing, hidden. Mrs. Williams' hand moved instinctively to her throat. Have you informed the police? They did not believe me. Or they did not care. Sophie paused thoughtfully. Something is wrong about her disappearance. Everyone is searching in the woods and checking if she ran away. But I think something happened right here at school. That is a very serious allegation, Sophie, Mrs. Williams said quietly. What makes you think that, Mr. Reynolds was here that afternoon. Lily was acting strangely all day. And Mr. Davies saw lights and heard voices in the north wing that same night, a man and a girl. Mrs. Williams' face paled slightly. David Reynolds is a very powerful man in this community, Sophie. The police have certainly interviewed him. Did they? Sophie challenged. Or did they just accept whatever he told them because he is on the governing body and his company donated the new sports hall? The teacher was silent for a long moment. What exactly are you asking me, Sophie? I need to know about Caitlin Reynolds. Why she really left Riverside last year. Mrs. Williams' eyes widened with alarm. She stood and moved to close the blinds on her classroom windows before returning to her seat. "This conversation never happened," she said in a low voice. But Caitlin did not just transfer schools. She was sent to a residential treatment facility in Scotland. There were serious concerns about her mental health, self-harming behaviors. "Did it have something to do with her hair?" Sophie asked, the connection suddenly crystallizing in her mind. Mrs. Williams looked startled. "How did you know that?" "I remember her," Sophie said softly. "She started pulling out her hair in clumps during year 7. Everyone said it was stress from her parents' divorce. The girls called her patches. Trichotillomania, Mrs. Williams confirmed. A compulsive disorder. David Reynolds could not handle having a daughter who was not perfect. He blamed his ex-wife, the school, everyone except himself. When Caitlin's condition worsened dramatically, he had her removed from Riverside very suddenly. And Lily knew Caitlin, Sophie pressed. "They were friends, they were," Mrs. Williams agreed. "Lily visited Caitlin in the hospital once. From what I heard, she came back very upset," said Mr. Reynolds would not allow her to see Caitlin again. Sophie processed this information, adding it to her mental map. "Did Lily ever talk to you about Caitlin? Or about Mr. Reynolds?" Mrs. Williams hesitated. "About 3 weeks ago, Lily stayed after class. She seemed anxious, distressed. She asked me what someone should do if they knew an adult was doing something wrong. I told her they should tell a trusted grown-up or contact the police. She looked away. I should have pressed harder for details. The bell signaling the end of lunch interrupted them. Mrs. Williams stood quickly. "I have a class arriving, Sophie. Please be extremely careful. If what you are suggesting is true," she did not finish the thought. "I will," Sophie promised, gathering her things. At the door, she turned back. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for believing me." Throughout the afternoon, Sophie's mind worked furiously to connect the pieces. During science class, she requested a lavatory pass and used the opportunity to visit the school's trophy display case, where she photographed a picture of the previous year's netball squad. Caitlin Reynolds stood in the back row, her face drawn, with noticeable thin spots in her hair poorly concealed by a headband. Lily stood beside her, one arm protectively around Caitlin's waist. After school, Sophie made her way to the public library. In the local newspaper archives, she found what she was searching for. An article about Reynolds Construction winning the bid for Riverside Preparatory Academy's North Wing renovation. The project had broken ground just 4 weeks after Caitlin's departure from the school. Sophie was so absorbed in her research that she did not notice Grace Hamilton approaching until the girl's shadow fell across the microfilm reader. "What are you doing, Baldy?" Grace demanded, flanked by Charlotte Whitfield and 2 other girls from their circle. Sophie quickly switched screens, but not before Grace caught a glimpse of the article. "Why are you researching Lily's disappearance? Are you some kind of creepy stalker?" "I am doing a history project," Sophie said evenly, though her heart was pounding rapidly. "Liar," Charlotte hissed. "Everyone knows you hated Lily because she told the truth about how disgusting your head looks." "Yeah," another girl chimed in. "Maybe you know something about where she went. Maybe you did something to her." Sophie felt the familiar tightening in her chest that preceded tears, but she fought it back determinedly. I am trying to help find her. Do you not want her found? Something strange flickered across Grace's face, fear perhaps, before her expression hardened again. Stay out of it, freak. My father says they have leads they are following. They do not need some weirdo interfering. The girls moved closer, surrounding Sophie's chair. Grace leaned down, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. If I find out you are spreading lies about my father, or Mr. Reynolds, you will regret it. Lily might be gone, but we are still here, and we can make your life way worse than she ever did. After the girls finally left, throwing one last sneer over their shoulders, Sophie remained frozen in her seat. The encounter had shaken her, but it had also revealed something important. Grace seemed genuinely afraid of what Sophie might discover. That fear confirmed Sophie was on the right track. That evening, her father was once again working late at the hospital. Sophie used his laptop to search for information about Caitlin Reynolds' treatment facility. She found the website for Highland Wellness Center, which specialized in adolescent mental health issues. On their staff page, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Dr. Catherine Morrison, child psychiatrist. Lily's mother. The connection was undeniable. Dr. Morrison had likely treated Caitlin Reynolds at the facility in Scotland. Had she learned something during those sessions? Something about David Reynolds that put Lily in danger when she became aware of it. Sophie turned to a fresh page in her journal and wrote, Connection established. Reynolds, Caitlin, Highland Center, Dr. Morrison, Lily. Sleep eluded Sophie that night. She lay awake, staring at the glow in the dark stars her father had placed on her ceiling years ago. When bedtime routines still included stories and goodnight kisses, instead of absent parents and locked doors. The pieces were aligning, but she still could not see the complete picture. The next morning brought new challenges. As Sophie approached her locker, she found it vandalized with the word snitch scrawled across it in black marker. Inside, her textbooks had been doused with water, the pages warped and sticking together. The message was crystal clear. Someone knew she was asking questions and wanted her to stop. During history class, a note landed on her desk. Sophie unfolded it cautiously, expecting another crude drawing or insult. Instead, she found a message in unfamiliar handwriting. North Wing Girls Lavatory after final bell. Come alone if you want to know about Lily. Sophie's first instinct was caution. This could easily be a trap set by Grace and her friends to humiliate her further. But it could also be a legitimate lead from someone afraid to come forward publicly. She tucked the note into her journal and tried to focus on the lesson, though her mind raced with possibilities. Throughout the day, Sophie watched for any sign of who might have sent the note. During lunch, she noticed a Year 10 girl named Zoe Park watching her from across the dining hall. Zoe had been Lily's mathematics tutor the previous term. When their eyes met, Zoe quickly looked away. After her final class, Sophie debated whether to follow the note's instructions. Reason told her to be suspicious, but instinct pushed her forward. She decided on a compromise. She would go to the North Wing, but would first inform Mr. Davies where she was going, in case it was indeed a trap. She found the caretaker in the supply cupboard near the gymnasium, organizing cleaning products. Mr. Davies, she said quietly. I am going to check something in the north wing. If I am not back in 20 minutes, can you come look for me?" The elderly man frowned. "That is not safe, Sophie." "The construction—" "Please," Sophie interrupted. "It is important. It might help find Lily." Something in her expression must have convinced him. 20 minutes, he agreed reluctantly. "Not a minute more. And if you hear anyone coming, you hide. You understand. Not everyone working on that site has been properly vetted, if you ask me." With Mr. Davies' reluctant blessing, Sophie made her way to the north wing, careful to avoid the security cameras she had mapped during her investigation. The abandoned corridor was thick with dust and the smell of old plaster. Construction materials were piled against walls. Stacks of plasterboard, coils of electrical wire, plastic sheeting draped over doorways. The girls' lavatory door hung partially off its hinges. Sophie pushed it open slowly, wincing at the creaking sound that echoed through the empty corridor. Inside, the mirrors were cracked or missing entirely, the cubicle doors removed, the floor littered with debris. It looked nothing like the place where she had found Lily's locket just days ago. This lavatory was clearly in a different section of the wing, one that had already undergone initial demolition. "Hello," Sophie called softly, her voice bouncing off the tiled walls. At first, there was no response. Then a rustling sound came from the last cubicle. Sophie froze, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. As she was about to retreat, Zoe Park stepped out from behind a partially demolished wall. "You actually came," Zoe said, sounding surprised. Her expression was a mixture of fear and determination. "I did not think you would. You sent the note?" Sophie asked, staying near the door. Zoe nodded. "I have seen you asking questions, looking through old newspapers. I know you're trying to figure out what happened to Lily. Do you know something?" "Maybe," Zoe whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "Lily told me things during our tutoring sessions. Things she was afraid to tell anyone else. About Mr. Reynolds and his daughter. About her mother's patient confidentiality being compromised." Sophie's pulse quickened. "What about them?" "Lily found emails," Zoe whispered urgently. "On her mother's computer. From Mr. Reynolds threatening to ruin Dr. Morrison's career if she did not change her diagnosis of Caitlin. He wanted Caitlin declared fit to return home, but Dr. Morrison refused, and Lily confronted him about it." Sophie realized the final piece clicking into place. "And Madison confronted him." Zoe nodded. "The day before she disappeared, she told me she was going to tell her mother about the emails, that she had copied them as proof." She paused, swallowing hard. "But then she texted me that night saying Mr. Reynolds had found out what she had done, and she was scared. That was the last I heard from her." The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside silenced them both. Sophie grabbed Zoe's arm and pulled her into one of the cubicles, pressing a finger to her lips. The lavatory door creaked open, and heavy boots crunched on the debris-strewn floor. "Anyone in here will be reported for trespassing," a man's voice called out. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs as she and Zoe remained perfectly still, barely breathing, until the footsteps retreated and the door swung shut again. "I have to go," Zoe whispered urgently. "If they find out I told you—" "Wait," Sophie grabbed her arm. "Did you tell the police?" Zoe's expression darkened. I tried. I spoke to Chief Inspector Williams yesterday. He said Lily was probably being dramatic, that I should not spread rumors about respected community members. She pulled away. Be careful, Sophie. Mr. Reynolds has friends everywhere. After Zoe slipped out, Sophie remained in the lavatory for several minutes, processing this new information. She had been right. Lily's disappearance was connected to what she knew about David Reynolds. But was Lily still alive? And if so, where was she being kept? Sophie checked her watch. Her 20 minutes were nearly up. As she turned to leave, her eye caught something shining in the debris near the sinks. A small silver heart with a tiny inscription. She picked it up carefully, turning it over in her palm. It was another charm from Lily's locket, one Sophie had not seen before. Engraved on the back were the words, "To my brave girl, love, Mum." This was not just another clue. It was a message. Lily had been here, in this very lavatory, sometime after Sophie had found the locket in the other location. She was leaving a trail, piece by piece, and Sophie was the only one following it. Sophie clutched the silver heart charm tightly in her palm as she made her way back to Mr. Davies, her mind racing with implications. This was not just evidence, it was hope. Lily was alive, at least recently enough to leave this breadcrumb. Find anything, Mr. Davies asked as Sophie approached the supply cupboard, where he was anxiously checking his watch. Sophie hesitated, then opened her hand to reveal the charm. Another piece of Lily's locket, in a different lavatory from where I found the first one, Mr. Davies' weathered face grew serious. That was not there during yesterday's inspection. I checked those lavatories myself. He lowered his voice. She is moving around in there, or someone is moving her. Mr. Davies, I think Lily is being held somewhere in the north wing, Sophie replied. The renovation makes it the perfect hiding place. Restricted access, construction noise covering any sounds, workers coming and going at odd hours. The caretaker rubbed his chin thoughtfully. There is a section in the far corner, used to be old classrooms, converted to storage before the renovation. Only way in is through a service corridor that has been blocked off to most of the construction crew. He hesitated. Governing body members would have access. Headmaster too, can you show me on a map? Sophie asked urgently. Mr. Davies shook his head. No map needed. I can take you there myself. Seeing Sophie's expression, he added quickly, just to show you the entrance. Then we call the police. The county police, not Williams and his cronies. We need evidence first, Sophie insisted. Something concrete they cannot ignore, before Mr. Davies could object. The school intercom crackled to life. Sophie Chen, please report to the headmaster's office immediately. Sophie Chen to the headmaster's office. They exchanged alarmed glances. You have been noticed, Mr. Davies said grimly. Someone saw you in the north wing. I have to go, Sophie said, slipping the charm into her pocket. They will come looking if I do not. This is getting dangerous, Sophie. You need to tell an adult everything you know. I am telling you, she replied. If I am not back in 30 minutes, call this number. She scribbled her father's mobile number on a scrap of paper. Tell him everything. Headmaster Thompson was not alone when Sophie entered his office. David Reynolds sat in one of the visitor chairs, his expensive suit immaculate, his silver hair perfectly styled. Chief Inspector Williams stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest. The atmosphere was tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Ah, Sophie," Headmaster Thompson said, his usual warm manner strained. "Please take a seat." Sophie sat carefully, keeping her rucksack on her lap, one hand inside where her journal was stored. Her eyes darted between the three men, calculating. "Sophie, Mr. Reynolds has brought something concerning to our attention," the headmaster began. "It seems you have been spreading rumors about Lily Morrison's disappearance, specifically rumors involving Mr. Reynolds. I have not spread any rumors," Sophie replied quietly. "I have been trying to find Lily." David Reynolds leaned forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I understand you are concerned about your classmate, Sophie. That is commendable, but amateur detective work can actually hinder a police investigation. Is that not right, Chief Inspector?" Chief Inspector Williams nodded sternly. "That is correct. We have trained professionals working around the clock on this case. And yet Lily is still missing," Sophie said, looking directly at Reynolds. 4 days now." A muscle twitched in Reynolds' jaw. "Young lady, I came here today because my daughter Caitlin has been upset by rumors that her medical condition is somehow connected to Lily's disappearance. These harmful speculations are causing her great distress during her recovery." Sophie's mind raced. Caitlin was back. That contradicted what Mrs. Williams had told her about the residential facility. "I am sorry to hear that," she said carefully. "How is Caitlin doing at Highland Wellness Center?" The effect was immediate and startling. Reynolds' face flushed red, and he stood abruptly. "What exactly are you implying?" Headmaster Thompson looked confused. "David, I thought Caitlin was attending Brambledown Academy in Devon." "She is," Reynolds snapped. "This girl is deliberately spreading misinformation." He turned to Chief Inspector Williams. "I want her questioned formally. She knows something about Lily's whereabouts." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sophie's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I found Lily's charm locket hidden in the North Wing lavatory," she said clearly. "And today I found another charm in a different location. Lily is leaving a trail." Chief Inspector Williams stepped forward. "You found evidence and did not report it." "I did report it," Sophie countered. "To you, Chief Inspector Williams. You dismissed it, just like you dismissed Zoe Park when she tried to tell you about the emails." The room went silent. Reynolds and Williams exchanged a look that confirmed Sophie's suspicions. Headmaster Thompson seemed genuinely confused, looking between them with growing concern. "What emails?" he asked. Before anyone could answer, the office door burst open. Dr. Michael Chen stood in the doorway. His hospital scrubs rumpled, his face a mask of fury. "What is going on here?" he demanded. "I get a call that my daughter is being interrogated without parental consent." Sophie had never been so relieved to see her father. "Dad, Dr. Chen," Headmaster Thompson began, "there seems to be a misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," Dr. Chen interrupted sharply, "is that you believe you can question a minor without a parent or attorney present." He crossed to Sophie and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "We are leaving now." "This is a police matter," Chief Inspector Williams objected. Your daughter may have information vital to our investigation. Then you can question her at the station, with me and our solicitor present." Dr. Chen's tone left no room for negotiation. "Sophie, get your things." As Sophie stood to leave, Reynolds made a final attempt. "Dr. Chen, your daughter has been trespassing in dangerous construction areas. She has been spreading malicious rumors about my family. Surely, as a medical professional, you understand the harm this could cause." Dr. Chen regarded Reynolds coldly. "As a medical professional, Mr. Reynolds, I understand many things, including the fact that my colleague Dr. Morrison expressed concerns about your influence over her daughter's treatment plans before she disappeared." He turned to the headmaster. "We will discuss this further after I have consulted our solicitor." The drive home was tense. Sophie sat silently in the passenger seat, waiting for her father's inevitable questions. "Mr. Davies called me," he finally said. "Told me some concerning things about what you have been up to." He glanced at her. "Sophie, what were you thinking? Investigating a potential kidnapping on your own." "No one was listening," Sophie said softly. "The police, the school, they all dismissed me because I am just the weird girl with no hair." Her father's expression softened. "Sophie, I found pieces of her locket, Dad. In the north wing. Lily is leaving clues, and I am the only one following them. Mr. Reynolds is involved, I am sure of it. He threatened Dr. Morrison over Caitlin's diagnosis, and Lily found out." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Dr. Morrison and I did discuss a case a few months ago. Not by name, of course. A colleague who felt pressured to amend a diagnosis for a powerful family. I did not know it was the Reynolds girl." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "If what you are saying is true, this is far more serious than I realized. Lily is alive, Dad. I know it, and she is somewhere in that north wing." Instead of driving home, Dr. Chen made an unexpected turn. "We are going to see someone who will listen," he explained. "An old friend from medical school who works with the county police. This has gone beyond Yorkshire jurisdiction." While her father made calls from the car, Sophie reviewed her notes, organizing her evidence. By the time they arrived at the county police headquarters an hour later, Sophie had prepared a comprehensive timeline of Lily's disappearance and all the connections to David Reynolds. County Detective Inspector Maria Santos listened intently as Sophie presented her findings, interrupting only to ask clarifying questions. Unlike Chief Inspector Williams, she treated Sophie's observations with respect, noting details and checking facts. "You have done remarkable investigative work," Detective Inspector Santos said when Sophie finished, "especially under such difficult circumstances." She turned to Dr. Chen. "We will need a search warrant for the North Wing. I will contact Judge Harrison immediately. She is not in Reynolds' pocket." "What about Lily?" Sophie asked anxiously. "If Mr. Reynolds realizes we are on to him, we will move quickly," Detective Inspector Santos assured her, "but carefully. If Lily is being held there, we do not want to spook her captor." Sophie hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver heart charm. "There is something else. I think Lily left this today, which means she was moved recently or can move around somehow." Detective Inspector Santos examined the charm. This could indicate she has some limited freedom of movement, or that she is being relocated within the building. She looked at Sophie seriously. Is there anything else you have not told me? Any detail, no matter how small? Sophie thought for a moment. The construction crew. Mr. Davies said not all of them had been properly vetted. And Mr. Reynolds' company is handling the renovation. We will check the employment records. Detective Inspector Santos nodded. Dr. Chen, I would like to place you and Sophie under protective custody until we execute the search warrant. No, Sophie said immediately. If I disappear now, Reynolds will know something is wrong. I need to go to school tomorrow, act normal. Absolutely not, her father protested. It is too dangerous. Dad, if Reynolds panics, he might move Lily or, Sophie argued. Detective Inspector, how long will it take to get the warrant? With Judge Harrison. By morning. We could execute it during school hours tomorrow. Then I need to be there, Sophie insisted. I know the North Wing better than anyone now. I can help you navigate it. After much debate, a compromise was reached. Sophie would attend school as normal, but with an undercover officer posing as a supply teacher nearby. At precisely 10:30 in the morning, the county police would execute their search warrant. Sophie would stay in her classroom until given the all clear. That night, despite her father's insistence that she rest, Sophie could not sleep. She sat by her window, watching the moon cast shadows across her garden, thinking of Lily somewhere in the darkness, perhaps looking at the same moon. Had she been brave or terrified when she left those clues? Did she believe anyone would find them? Morning came too quickly. Sophie dressed with unusual care, making sure her beanie was securely positioned. Her father drove her to school in silence, squeezing her hand before she got out of the car. Remember the plan, he said. Stay in Mr. Peterson's class until the officers come for you. I will, Sophie promised, though a plan was already forming in her mind, one she had not shared with the adults. The first 2 periods passed with excruciating slowness. Sophie watched the clock, counting minutes, barely hearing the lessons. At 10:15, she raised her hand and asked for a lavatory pass. Mr. Peterson, the undercover officer, gave her a warning look, but could not deny the request without drawing attention. Instead of heading to the lavatory, Sophie slipped down the science corridor and through the door that connected to the old service passage. Her heart pounded as she made her way toward the north wing, staying close to the walls, listening for any sound. At exactly 10:28, she heard the commotion begin. Police radios crackling, authoritative voices announcing the execution of a search warrant. Sophie quickened her pace, reaching the junction Mr. Davies had described. To her left lay the main renovation area, where police would be searching. To her right, a narrow corridor led to the forgotten storage rooms. She turned right. The passageway was dim, illuminated only by emergency lighting. Sophie moved cautiously, alert for any sign of movement. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy metal door, slightly ajar. From beyond it came the faint sound of voices, one deep and angry, one higher and pleading. Sophie crept closer, her breath caught in her throat. Through the narrow opening, she could see David Reynolds pacing furiously, a phone pressed to his ear. And there, tied to a chair in the corner of what appeared to be an old staff room, was Lily Morrison. Her blonde hair was tangled, her face tear-stained, but she was very much alive. "They are coming," Reynolds was saying into the phone. "The county police are executing a warrant right now. We need to move her immediately." He paused, listening. "No, there is no time. Meet me at the south exit in 5 minutes with the car." Sophie's mind raced. The police were searching the wrong section. By the time they found this hidden area, Reynolds would have spirited Lily away. She had to act now. Without a clear plan, Sophie pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "The police are already at the south exit, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "They know everything." Reynolds froze, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face contorting with shock and rage as he registered Sophie's presence. Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. A muffled sound escaping from behind the duct tape covering her mouth. "I will call you back," Reynolds said curtly into the phone before disconnecting. His initial surprise quickly hardened into something more dangerous as he assessed the small figure standing in the doorway. "Sophie Chen," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "The girl no one listens to. How fitting that you should be the one to find us." Sophie stood her ground despite the trembling in her legs. "They are listening now, Mr. Reynolds. Detective Inspector Santos has your emails to Dr. Morrison. She knows about Caitlin." A flash of genuine pain crossed Reynolds' face at the mention of his daughter. "You know nothing about Caitlin. Nothing about what Catherine Morrison did to her." "I know she was sick," Sophie said, taking a cautious step forward, her eyes darting to Lily. "I know she pulled out her hair like me, but different. Trichotillomania, not loose anagen syndrome. I know you could not accept that she needed help." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "Help? Morrison wanted to keep my daughter locked away in that facility indefinitely. She convinced Caitlin that her own father was the cause of her condition, turned my daughter against me." His voice rose. "And then Lily found those emails, threatened to expose me to the governing body, to have me removed as chairman." "So you took her," Sophie said, inching closer to Lily. "To silence her." "I protected my family," Reynolds shouted, slamming his hand on a nearby desk. "Morrison ruined my daughter's life with her diagnosis. Lily was going to ruin mine with her meddling. I just needed time to make arrangements, to get Caitlin transferred to a different doctor." Lily strained against her bonds, her eyes pleading with Sophie. Up close, Sophie could see the bruises on her former tormentor's wrists from the restraints, the dried tear tracks on her dirty face. Whatever cruelty Lily had shown Sophie over the years paled in comparison to the terror she must have endured these past days. "You will not get away with this," Sophie said, trying to keep Reynolds talking, hoping the police would hear the commotion. "Everyone is looking for Lily." "Everyone is looking in the wrong places," Reynolds countered, regaining his composure. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small handgun, the sight of which made Sophie's blood run cold. "And now I have 2 problems instead of 1. Sophie's throat constricted with fear, but she forced herself to keep talking. "Shooting us will only make things worse. They will hear the gunshot. Construction noise," Reynolds said with a chilling smile. "Very useful for covering all sorts of sounds. No one thought twice about hammering or drilling coming from a renovation zone." He gestured with the gun. "Move away from the door. Over there next to Lily." Sophie complied, her mind racing for a solution. As she moved closer to Lily, she noticed the girl's hands behind her back, working frantically at something. The chair Lily was tied to had a broken slat in the back. She had been gradually weakening her restraints. "You do not understand what it is like," Reynolds continued, his voice taking on a confessional quality as he kept the gun trained on Sophie. "To watch your child suffer, to see her destroy herself piece by piece. The doctors, the therapists, they all blamed me, said my controlling behavior and unrealistic expectations triggered Caitlin's condition." "Me," Sophie said quietly. "You could not accept her as she was." Reynolds' face darkened. "Do not you dare judge me. Look at you, a child with no hair, no friends. Your own parents could not bear to stay together because of your condition." The words struck Sophie like physical blows, touching her deepest insecurities. For a moment, she felt 13 years old again, crying in the lavatory after another child had called her alien head on her first day of secondary school. "That is not true," she managed, though her voice wavered. "My parents' divorce was not because of me." "Was it not?" Reynolds pressed, a cruel glint in his eye. "Ask your father how many experimental treatments he researched before he gave up. Ask your mother how many times she cried after another mother pulled their child away from you at the playground." Behind Sophie, Lily had gone very still, her eyes fixed on Reynolds with a new expression, not fear now, but fury. She had stopped working at her restraints and was instead focusing intently on something beyond Sophie's shoulder. Reynolds noticed too late. "What are you looking at, girl?" he demanded, starting to turn. A loud crash echoed through the room as a fire extinguisher came down hard on Reynolds' shoulder. He cried out in pain, the gun flying from his hand and skittering across the floor. "Mr. Davies stood in the doorway, the extinguisher raised for another blow if necessary. "Run, Sophie," the caretaker shouted. Reynolds recovered quickly, lunging for the gun. Sophie dove forward, kicking it further away before he could reach it. Lily, seizing the moment of chaos, gave one final wrench against her restraints. The weakened chair back splintered, freeing her hands. She immediately tore the duct tape from her mouth, gasping for air. "You miserable old man," Reynolds spat at Davies, clutching his injured shoulder. "You are finished at this school. I will make sure of it. I reckon we are all finished here once the police see what you have done, mister." Davies replied steadily, keeping the extinguisher raised. Reynolds' eyes darted between them, calculating his odds. With a sudden burst of desperate energy, he charged toward Davies, sending the older man crashing into a stack of storage boxes. The impact knocked the caretaker to the ground, the extinguisher rolling from his grasp. "Sophie, run!" Lily screamed, still working to free her legs from the chair. Get help, but Sophie did not run. As Reynolds scrambled for the fallen extinguisher to use as a weapon, she grabbed a broken chair leg from Lily's restraints and swung it with all her strength, connecting with Reynolds' knee. He howled in pain, collapsing to the floor. The commotion finally attracted attention. Heavy footsteps pounded down the corridor, and Detective Inspector Santos burst into the room, weapon drawn, followed by 2 uniformed officers. "Police, do not move," she commanded. Reynolds, still on the ground clutching his knee, looked up with a mixture of hatred and defeat. "This is not over," he muttered as an officer handcuffed him. "You will see." Parents like us are the same, Dr. Chen. We just want to fix our broken children. Sophie turned to see her father standing in the doorway, his face ashen as he took in the scene. The gun on the floor, Lily half tied to a splintered chair. Mr. Davies struggling to his feet among toppled boxes. For a moment, Sophie thought she saw a flicker of recognition in her father's eyes at Reynolds' words, a shadow of painful truth. Then Dr. Chen crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Sophie into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I am okay, Dad," she whispered against his shirt. "Really? You could have been killed," he said, his voice raw. "When Mr. Peterson said you had left class," he could not finish the sentence. Over her father's shoulder, Sophie watched as paramedics entered the room and began attending to Lily. The girl who had tormented her for years looked small and vulnerable on the stretcher, her usual confidence shattered. As they prepared to move her, Lily's eyes met Sophie's across the room. "Why?" Lily asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you risk your life for me after everything I did to you?" The room fell quiet, everyone waiting for Sophie's answer. She gently extricated herself from her father's embrace and moved to Lily's side. "Because no one deserves what happened to you," Sophie said simply. "Not even you." Lily's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I am so sorry, Sophie. For all of it. For the names, the teasing. I was horrible to you." "Yes, you were," Sophie agreed, not unkindly. "I did not think anyone would look for me," Lily confessed, her voice barely audible. "When he first locked me in here, I thought no one will notice I am gone, except for missing Instagram likes. But you noticed. You followed my clues." "I noticed everything," Sophie said. "I had to. It was how I survived." As the paramedics prepared to wheel Lily out, she reached for Sophie's hand, squeezing it weakly. "I do not deserve your forgiveness." Sophie did not contradict her. The truth was, forgiveness felt distant, obscured by years of casual cruelty and deliberate humiliation. What she felt was not forgiveness, not yet, but something equally powerful. The understanding that beneath Lily's perfect exterior lay a girl as frightened and vulnerable as herself. "Rest," Sophie told her. "We will talk when you are better." As Lily was taken away, Detective Inspector Santos approached Sophie and her father. "You took an incredible risk," she said, her tone a mixture of admiration and admonishment. "But you saved her life. Reynolds was planning to move her out of the county today. We might never have found her." The praise felt hollow against the weight of what had just happened. Sophie was suddenly aware of her exhaustion, the adrenaline that had sustained her draining away. Her father must have sensed it, because he wrapped a supportive arm around her shoulders. "Let us get you home," he said softly. "You have done enough." But as they walked out of the building, Sophie knew that while Lily had been found, the repercussions of these events were just beginning. The nightmare was not over. It had simply entered a new chapter, one where victims became survivors, but where wounds still needed time to heal. The weeks following Lily's rescue unfolded like pages turning in a book Sophie had never expected to write. What she had anticipated would be a simple resolution: the bad man caught, the victim saved. Justice served proved to be far more complex than any 13-year-old should have to navigate. The first revelation came during Reynolds' interrogation, details of which filtered through hushed conversations between her parents and eventually reached Sophie's ears. Detective Inspector Santos had shared some of the findings with Dr. Chen. Understanding that Sophie deserved to know the truth she had risked her life to uncover. David Reynolds had not simply been a powerful man, abusing his position. His confession revealed a father's twisted love, gone catastrophically wrong. When Caitlin had been diagnosed with trichotillomania, Reynolds had been unable to accept that his daughter's condition was a legitimate medical issue rather than a character flaw he could discipline away. He had pressured Dr. Morrison relentlessly to change her diagnosis, threatening to destroy her medical practice and have her license revoked if she did not declare Caitlin cured and suitable for discharge. He truly believed he was protecting his family. Detective Inspector Santos explained to Sophie and her father during a follow-up interview. In his mind, Dr. Morrison was the villain keeping his daughter from coming home. When Lily discovered those threatening emails and confronted him, he saw her as another obstacle to his daughter's recovery. Sophie listened with the gravity of someone far older than her years. But keeping Lily prisoner would not bring Caitlin home. Reynolds was not thinking rationally by then, the detective replied. He was desperate. His plan was to relocate Lily out of the county, then claim she had run away. He thought without her testimony about the emails, Dr. Morrison would not dare file a formal complaint against him. The psychological evaluation conducted on Reynolds painted a picture of a man whose inability to accept his daughter's imperfection had driven him to increasingly desperate measures. Sophie found herself thinking about this often, how someone's love could become so distorted that it caused the very harm it sought to prevent. Lily's recovery proved equally complex. After her initial treatment for dehydration and minor injuries, she had been transferred to Highland Wellness Center, the same facility where Caitlin Reynolds was receiving treatment. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. Sophie received her first letter from Lily 4 weeks after the rescue. The handwriting was shaky, and several words had been crossed out and rewritten. "Dear Sophie," it began, "my therapist says I should write to you, even though I do not know what to say. I keep thinking about that moment when you walked into that room. I was so scared, and then you were there and I could not believe it. Why would you save me after everything I did to you? Dr. Chen, my therapist, says maybe you can help me understand." The letter continued for 2 pages, filled with questions that Sophie realized Lily was really asking herself. How do you forgive someone who hurt you? How do you accept help from someone you have wronged? How do you rebuild a sense of self after both inflicting and experiencing trauma? Sophie wrote back, her own letter shorter but equally honest. "I do not know if I forgive you yet, but I know that what happened to you was wrong, no matter what you did to me before. Maybe we both have things to figure out." The correspondence continued sporadically over the following weeks. Lily wrote about her therapy sessions, her slowly developing friendship with Caitlin Reynolds, and her growing understanding of the pain she had caused others. Sophie shared her own struggles with returning to normal life at a school where she was now known as the girl who saved Lily Morrison. The attention was overwhelming. Local news stations wanted interviews. Other students who had never spoken to her before suddenly approached her in corridors with awkward compliments and requests to be friends. Teachers treated her with a careful respect, that felt almost as isolating as the previous neglect. "It is like I am a different kind of invisible now," Sophie confided to Mrs. Williams one afternoon. The interim head teacher had kept her original classroom, insisting she preferred teaching to administration. "Before, people did not see me because they did not want to. Now they do not see me because they only see what I did." Mrs. Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Fame can be another kind of prison, cannot it? People see the heroic act, but not the person who performed it." The most unexpected change came in Sophie's relationship with her parents. Her father had taken a leave of absence from the hospital to spend time with her, something Sophie could not remember him ever doing. They spent hours talking, not just about the kidnapping, but about her condition, her experiences at school, her feelings about everything she had endured. "I owe you an apology," he said one evening as they sat in their favorite cafe, sharing a plate of chips. "I thought if I could fix your hair loss medically, I could fix everything else too. I did not realize I was missing the most important part, listening to you." Her mother's transformation was equally profound. Sarah Chen began attending support groups for parents of children with visible differences, something she had previously refused to consider. She learned to style what hair Sophie had into tiny decorative plaits, treating each strand as precious rather than focusing on what was missing. "I was so afraid people would judge you," her mother admitted during one of their new weekly mother-daughter lunches. "I did not realize I was judging you myself." The community response to the kidnapping created ripples that extended far beyond Sophie's personal experience. Headmaster Thompson's resignation had triggered a comprehensive review of Riverside Preparatory Academy's policies. The governing body, minus David Reynolds, who faced federal kidnapping charges, implemented new anti-bullying protocols and hired additional counselors. Chief Inspector Williams faced an internal affairs investigation that resulted in his early retirement. The county police took over several ongoing cases where his close relationships with prominent families had potentially compromised investigations. Sophie found herself reluctantly at the center of these institutional changes. The new anti-bullying initiative was named the Chen Morrison Protocol, combining Sophie's detective work with Lily's experience as both perpetrator and victim of systematic harassment. "We want students to understand that being different is not a weakness," explained the new head teacher, Dr. Sarah Martinez, during a school assembly. "Sophie Chen showed us that the qualities that make someone seem vulnerable, observation skills, empathy, the ability to move unnoticed, can also be tremendous strengths." Sophie sat in the assembly hall, simultaneously proud and uncomfortable as her classmates applauded. The recognition felt surreal, but she was gradually learning to accept it without letting it define her entirely. The most profound revelation came through an unexpected source, Caitlin Reynolds. The girl wrote to Sophie from the treatment facility, a letter that her mother delivered personally during one of her supervised visits home. "I want you to know what my father was really like," Caitlin's letter began. "Everyone thinks he just could not accept my hair pulling, but it was deeper than that. He could not accept any imperfection. When I started pulling out my hair, he did not see a sick daughter who needed help. He saw a failure of his parenting, a reflection of his own inadequacy." The letter continued with painful honesty about growing up in a household where love was conditional on performance, where any sign of struggle was seen as weakness to be eliminated rather than humanity to be embraced. When Lily told me about you, about how you lived with your condition openly, how you did not hide from it, I was jealous, Caitlin wrote. You had something I had never experienced: parents who loved you for who you were, not who they wanted you to be. My father's love came with so many conditions that eventually I stopped believing I deserved love at all. Reading this letter, Sophie understood something crucial about the interconnectedness of their experiences. Her condition had isolated her, but it had also protected her from the kind of conditional love that had driven Caitlin to self-harm and Lily to participate in bullying. The letter concluded with an invitation. Lily and I are starting a support group here at the center for young people who have experienced appearance-related bullying or self-harm. Would you consider visiting? I think you could help other children understand that being different is not something to cure. It is something to celebrate. Sophie discussed the invitation with her parents and Mrs. Williams. The idea of speaking to other children about her experiences felt both terrifying and necessary. You do not have to be anyone's savior, her father assured her. But you have learned something valuable about strength and acceptance. If you want to share that, we will support you. The decision to visit the treatment center marked another turning point in Sophie's understanding of her own story. She was not just the girl who had solved a kidnapping, or the victim who had triumphed over her bullies. She was someone who had learned to see clearly, to act with courage, and to extend empathy even to those who had hurt her. As she prepared for the visit, Sophie reflected on how much had changed since that terrible Wednesday when Lily had disappeared. The girl who had once hidden behind woolen beanies and avoided mirrors was now planning to share her story with others who struggled with their own differences. The truth Sophie had uncovered was not just about David Reynolds' crimes or Lily's whereabouts. It was about the power of seeing clearly, acting with courage, and choosing empathy over revenge. These were lessons that would serve her long after the headlines faded and the attention moved on to other stories. In her journal that night, Sophie wrote, "I used to think being different was my biggest problem. Now I understand it was my greatest strength, not because it made me special, but because it taught me to see others clearly, their pain, their fears, their potential for both cruelty and kindness. Maybe that is what courage really is, seeing clearly and choosing to act with love anyway." The morning sun filtered through Sophie's bedroom window, casting a warm glow across the floor. For the first time in weeks, she woke without the immediate weight of anxiety pressing down on her chest. 6 months had passed since the events in the North Wing. 6 months of healing, of quiet changes that had rippled through Yorkshire like stones dropped in still water. Sophie sat at her dressing table, a gift from her mother, who had finally understood that avoiding mirrors had only deepened Sophie's shame. With cautious fingers, she touched the fine, downy hair that had begun growing more consistently across her scalp. Dr. Martinez, her mother's colleague and a specialist in pediatric dermatology, had developed a treatment plan that, while not a cure for loose anagen syndrome, had shown promising results in stabilizing Sophie's hair growth. "It is looking better," her mother said from the doorway, offering a tentative smile. "Since the ordeal, Sarah Chen had made considerable efforts to bridge the distance that had grown between them. She had reduced her work hours, attended support group meetings for parents of children with chronic conditions, and most importantly, had begun really listening to Sophie. "It is different," Sophie acknowledged, studying her reflection. "But I am not hiding anymore, even if it never gets thicker." The change in Sophie's appearance was minor compared to the transformation in her life. Lily's rescue and Reynolds' subsequent arrest had turned Yorkshire upside down. The governing body chairman's fall from grace had exposed a network of influence and intimidation that had allowed bullying to flourish unchecked at Riverside Preparatory Academy. Headmaster Thompson had resigned in disgrace when it became clear he had dismissed multiple reports of bullying to maintain the school's prestigious reputation. Chief Inspector Williams faced an internal investigation for his mishandling of Lily's disappearance and his close relationship with Reynolds. The revelations had forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the cost of looking away. Sophie glanced at the invitation propped against her lamp, a hand-decorated card with pressed flowers and careful calligraphy. "You are invited to Lily Morrison's welcome home celebration." After 3 months of intensive therapy at Highland Wellness Center, where she had eventually met and formed a bond with Caitlin Reynolds, Lily was finally returning to Yorkshire. "Are you sure you want to go?" her mother asked, sensing Sophie's hesitation. Sophie nodded. "I need to. For both of us." The Morrison home was transformed for the occasion, with colorful banners and flowers adorning the entrance. Dr. Morrison greeted Sophie and her mother at the door, enveloping Sophie in a tearful embrace. "My brave girl," she whispered. "Lily has been asking when you would arrive." The reunion between Sophie and Lily took place in the garden, away from the cheerful chaos of the party. Lily looked thinner, more subdued. Her designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a jumper. The most striking change was her hair. She had cut her long blonde locks into a short bob, donating the excess to a charity that made wigs for children with hair loss. "You came," Lily said, her eyes brightening. "I was not sure you would." "I said I would," Sophie replied simply, settling beside her on the garden bench. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, Lily spoke. "My therapist says I should tell you how I am feeling, not just say sorry again." She took a deep breath. "I feel ashamed. For years, I made fun of you for something you could not control, while I was hiding my own pain and fears. I was cruel because it was easier than facing what was happening at home." Sophie listened without interrupting. She had learned during her own counseling sessions that healing was not neat or linear. It came in fits and starts, in small moments of honesty like this one. "I am not asking you to forget what I did," Lily continued. "I just want you to know that those days in that room, thinking I might die there," her voice caught. "All I could think about was how many days I had made miserable for you. How many times I had made you feel trapped and afraid." "It was not the same," Sophie said quietly. "No," Lily agreed, "but it helped me understand a little." From inside the house came the sounds of laughter and conversation, life continuing, healing beginning. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I have something for you," she said, handing it to Lily. "Mrs. Williams had helped Sophie find the missing pieces. Lily opened the box to find her charm locket completely restored. Tears welled in her eyes as she lifted it carefully, the silver links catching the sunlight. "I added one," Sophie said, pointing to a small silver heart different from the others. Engraved on its surface was a single word, "Courage," for leaving the clues, Sophie explained. That took bravery. Lily clasped the locket around her wrist with trembling fingers. "I do not know if I deserve this." "It is not about deserving," Sophie said. "It is about moving forward." The two girls rejoined the party, where they were greeted by a surprising sight. Mrs. Williams engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Chen. Since the events at the school, Sophie's father had made extraordinary efforts to be present in her life, attending school functions and even organizing a support group for families affected by childhood medical conditions. Seeing him laughing with Mrs. Williams, who had been appointed permanent head teacher following Thompson's departure, filled Sophie with quiet happiness. Mr. Davies was there too, honored as a hero for his role in Lily's rescue. The elderly caretaker had received a standing ovation at the school assembly, where the new anti-bullying initiative, named the Chen-Morrison Protocol, had been announced. No longer invisible, he now served on the school's safety committee, his experience and wisdom finally recognized. Zoe Park waved Sophie over to where she sat with a group of students from different social circles. The barriers that had once rigidly defined Riverside's hierarchy had begun to crumble in the aftermath of Lily's ordeal. Shared trauma had created unexpected connections, and Sophie found herself welcomed into conversations where she had once been deliberately excluded. As the afternoon progressed, Dr. Morrison clinked a glass for attention. "I want to thank you all for coming today," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "These past months have been incredibly difficult, but they have also shown me the power of community, of speaking truth, and of the extraordinary courage that can come from our children." She gestured to Lily and Sophie. "These two young women have taught us all something about resilience, about forgiveness, and about the kind of strength that does not make headlines, but changes lives nonetheless." Lily and Sophie have worked with the governing body to establish a new peer counseling program that will help students facing isolation, bullying, or family difficulties. Applause rippled through the gathering. Sophie felt her cheeks warm at the attention, but for once she did not duck her head or try to disappear. Instead, she stood a little straighter, accepting the acknowledgement not just for herself, but for every child who had ever felt different or alone. Later, as twilight settled over Yorkshire, Sophie sat on the Morrisons' porch swing, watching fireflies begin their evening dance over the lawn. Lily joined her, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in hand. "My therapist says Caitlin is coming home next month," Lily said, passing a mug to Sophie. "Her father is in prison, but her mother has full custody now. She is going to attend Riverside again." "Is she nervous?" Sophie asked. Lily nodded, terrified, but I told her things are different now. I told her about you. The implication hung in the air that Sophie might help ease Caitlin's transition back to the school where she had once suffered. It was a request, but also a recognition of Sophie's unique strength. "I will talk to her," Sophie promised. "She will not be alone." As darkness fell, parents began gathering their children the celebration winding down. Dr. Chen approached, car keys in hand. "Ready to go, sweetheart." Sophie nodded, rising from the swing. Lily stood too, hesitating before pulling Sophie into a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible." The irony was not lost on Sophie that Lily, who had once been the most visible girl at Riverside, had needed to be truly seen just as much as Sophie had. They had both been hiding in different ways, both trapped by expectations and fears. On the drive home, Sophie watched the familiar streets of Yorkshire pass by her window. The town looked the same, the stone cottages, the manicured gardens, the oak trees now heavy with summer leaves. But Sophie knew it had changed. Or perhaps she had changed in how she saw it. "Dad," she asked suddenly, "do you think people can really change? Or do they just become more of who they always were?" Dr. Chen considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think people grow into the truth of themselves," he said finally. "Sometimes that looks like change, but maybe it is just becoming more authentic." Sophie thought about this as they pulled into their driveway. Her mother's car was already there. A family dinner awaited, a small but significant step in their healing process. As she stepped from the car, Sophie reached up and removed her beanie, letting the evening breeze touch her scalp. The sensation was both foreign and freeing. Tomorrow she might wear the beanie again, or she might not. The choice was hers, and for the first time, it felt like a choice rather than a necessity. Inside, her mother had set the table with candles and the good china, usually reserved for holidays. The three of them sat together, passing dishes and sharing stories from their day. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, the silences comfortable rather than strained. Later in her room, Sophie opened her journal to a fresh page. For months, she had recorded observations about others, using words as a shield between herself and a world that had seemed determined to hurt her. Tonight, she wrote something different, not about Lily or her parents or the changing dynamics at school, but about herself. "I am Sophie Chen," she wrote, the words bold and clear. "I have loose anagen syndrome. I helped save Lily Morrison. I am learning to forgive. I am more than what people see or do not see. I am enough exactly as I am." She closed the journal and placed it on her bedside table, no longer needing to hide it away. Outside her window, the stars shone clearly in the summer sky, constant and bright. A reminder that sometimes the things that seem most broken can cast the most beautiful light. In Sophie's journey, we witness the profound truth that often the most vulnerable among us possess the greatest strength. As we grow older, we recognize how children like Sophie, with her sparse hair, and Lily, with her hidden pain, reflect our own struggles with acceptance and authenticity. Remember when your own children faced rejection, or perhaps when you yourself stood alone. Sophie's story reminds us that beneath our carefully constructed appearances lie universal human needs. To be seen, to belong, to matter. Her courage to remove her beanie in the evening breeze speaks to our own midlife reckonings. Those moments when we finally shed masks worn for decades and embrace our authentic selves, imperfections and all. The reconciliation between Sophie and Lily echoes our own unfinished business with those who have hurt us or whom we have hurt. Their healing journey mirrors the work many of us undertake in our later years, realizing that true freedom comes not from forgetting the past, but from transforming it into wisdom. As Sophie writes in her journal, "I'm enough exactly as I am," words that resonate deeply in hearts that have weathered life storms and now seek peace in self-acceptance rather than external validation. Her story teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act with love despite our fears. In a world that often values perfection over authenticity, Sophie Chen reminds us that our greatest strength may lie not in hiding our differences, but in embracing them as the very qualities that make us uniquely capable of seeing, understanding, and helping others. Sometimes it is the one who has been invisible who sees most clearly, and sometimes that clarity can save us all. This incident took place during my childhood in the early 1980s, and while it seemed relatively normal at the time, looking back now fills me with genuine unease. We resided in a peaceful suburban community where trust was commonplace. Back doors remained unlocked. Children played freely outdoors, and neighbors frequently visited without formal invitations. However, one particular neighbor crossed boundaries in ways that still disturb me today. His name was Robert, and he lived 3 houses down from us. Robert always appeared overly enthusiastic when greeting people, constantly waving from his front lawn with an intensity that felt forced and unnatural. What made Robert truly unsettling was his habit of entering our home uninvited. I'm not talking about knocking and waiting. He would simply walk through our back door as if he owned the place. Sometimes he wouldn't even announce his presence, just silently slip inside while we were occupied elsewhere in the house. My parents never seemed particularly alarmed by this behavior, at least not in front of me. It wasn't until years later that I understood how deeply inappropriate and invasive Robert's actions truly were. The most disturbing incident occurred on a sunny afternoon when my father was working in the garage. I was in my bedroom, probably reading or playing with action figures, when I heard the distinctive creak of our back door opening. The familiar click of the latch followed, then heavy footsteps that didn't match my father's usual gait. Suddenly, my father's voice cut through the silence, sharp and confrontational. "Robert, what the hell are you doing in here?" I rushed to the hallway and witnessed a scene that has stayed with me ever since. Robert stood casually in our living room, leaning against the armrest of our couch, sipping from one of our cans of beer as if he belonged there. My father stood in the doorway wearing his work clothes, his face displaying a mixture of shock, frustration, and barely contained anger. The tension in the room was palpable. Robert seemed completely unbothered by the confrontation, offering a half-hearted smile and saying something like, "Hey there, just thought I'd stop by and see how things were going." My father spent several uncomfortable minutes trying to convince Robert to leave, but Robert acted as though nothing was wrong, making small talk about weather and neighborhood gossip. Eventually, my father had to physically escort him to the door. After Robert left, waving as if departing from a pleasant social gathering, my father immediately locked the door behind him. I could tell the encounter had shaken him deeply, though he tried to minimize it when speaking to me. He simply instructed me to inform him or my mother if Robert ever entered while I was alone, and if that happened, I should immediately go to Mrs. Patterson's house next door. Within a few weeks, I noticed my father installing a tall wooden fence around our backyard with a locked gate. At the time, I assumed it was for privacy or perhaps to contain a future pet. It wasn't until I was much older that my father revealed the true reason for that security upgrade. He explained that after confronting Robert that day, he learned that Robert had been entering our home regularly for months, sometimes when no one was present. Our beer had been disappearing at an alarming rate, which had actually caused some tension between my parents when my mother accused my father of drinking excessively. When my father directly asked Robert about his uninvited visits, Robert casually admitted to walking in whenever he felt like it, checking out our kitchen, sitting on our furniture, and treating our home like his personal space. The fence went up immediately after this conversation, not for privacy or pets, but to prevent Robert from continuing his disturbing pattern of boundary violations. Looking back as an adult, I'm horrified by how normalized this behavior seemed at the time. The idea of someone regularly entering my home uninvited, sitting on my furniture, and consuming my food without permission is absolutely terrifying. We eventually moved away from that neighborhood, and I have no idea what became of Robert. But I'll never forget how something so inappropriate was allowed to continue for so long simply because it developed gradually, and my parents wanted to avoid confrontation. This happened when I was around 12 years old, sometime in the early 2000s. We lived in a typical middle-class neighborhood, quiet, safe, and not the kind of place where you'd expect anything dramatic to occur. It was early evening, probably around 6 o'clock, and I was home from school watching television in our living room. My mother was in the dining room, either folding laundry or tidying up after dinner. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across our yard, but there was still plenty of daylight remaining. Suddenly, someone began knocking on our front door. Not a gentle knock, but rapid, insistent rapping that immediately caught our attention. It wasn't aggressive exactly, but it was urgent enough to make both my mother and me stop what we were doing. My mother approached the front door and peered through the peephole. She didn't recognize the man standing on our porch, so she quietly told me to remain silent and stay out of sight. When I asked who it was, she whispered, "I have no idea, and we're not opening this door." My mother had always been cautious about unexpected visitors, especially when my father wasn't home. The man knocked several more times, waited briefly, then appeared to leave. We assumed he had given up and moved on to another house. However, within a minute, we heard the side gate on the far side of our house swing open. That's when my mother's demeanor shifted from cautious to genuinely alarmed. Our gate wasn't locked, just latched, and wouldn't stop someone who was truly determined to get inside. She quickly instructed me to go to the hallway and keep completely out of sight. Then she walked swiftly to her bedroom and returned carrying her handgun. My mother wasn't someone who talked about owning firearms or made a show of having them. It was simply something she kept for situations exactly like this one. She moved quietly to the kitchen, where our back door provided a clear view of the backyard. Through the glass, she could see the same man who had been at our front door. He was now trying the door handle and peering through the window, clearly attempting to determine if anyone was home. My mother later told me she watched him pull something from his pocket, possibly a screwdriver or similar tool, and raise it toward the glass as if preparing to break in. At that moment, she opened the door just wide enough for him to see both her and the weapon in her hands. She didn't say a word. Neither did he. He looked at her, froze completely, then turned and ran straight back through our gate and down the street as fast as he could move. My mother immediately called the police and provided a detailed description. But by the time officers arrived, the intruder was long gone. We figured that would be the end of the incident. The next day, however, we received a call from a police officer informing us that the same individual had broken into another house not far from ours later that same night. He had attempted to enter through a window, slipped during the break-in, and injured his leg badly enough that he couldn't escape when homeowners discovered him. The officer explained that the suspect had an extensive criminal record, nothing violent as far as they knew, but a long history of breaking and entering, and he had served time in prison before. According to the police, he probably wasn't targeting our house specifically, just looking for homes that appeared empty and vulnerable. We never experienced another incident like that, but I still think about it sometimes. My mother remained calm under pressure and acted decisively when it mattered most. If she hadn't seen him when she did and been prepared to defend our home, there's no telling how far he might have gotten or what could have happened to us. This happened several years ago, but it still comes up in conversations because of how surreal and terrifying the experience was. One of my closest friends lived in a rental house with 3 other guys while they were all attending college. It wasn't the greatest neighborhood, but it wasn't terrible either, just kind of rundown and noisy, mostly students, some older residents, and a few questionable houses scattered throughout. It was around 11 o'clock at night on a weekday. Not an unusual time for people to stop by their place, as there was always someone coming or going. I wasn't there that night, but I heard about it the next morning directly from my friend, and he was still visibly shaken up by what had occurred. He was in his room, either playing video games or watching videos online, when someone began pounding on the front door. One of his housemates opened the door without really thinking about it, and that's when 4 men pushed their way inside aggressively, moving fast like they meant business. One of them had a handgun and immediately pressed it against my friend's neck, shoving him up against the hallway wall. They didn't shout or make elaborate threats. They simply said something like, "Where are the drugs?" It wasn't really a question. It was stated as an assumption, as if they were absolutely certain that's what they would find. My friend kept repeating, "We don't have any. We don't have anything like that, I swear." He offered to let them take whatever they wanted: money, electronics, anything of value. But they were focused on finding one specific thing. While the armed man held him against the wall, the other 3 systematically searched the entire house. They went through every room, pulled out drawers, opened closets, looked under beds. They didn't destroy the place, but it was clear they were experienced at this kind of search. It wasn't chaotic or random. It was methodical and thorough. The whole ordeal lasted maybe 5 or 6 minutes, but for my friend, it felt like hours. Eventually, the men realized they weren't going to find what they were looking for. One of them said something like, "This isn't the right place," and they began filing back toward the door. Just before the last one left, he looked at my friend, who was still frozen against the wall, and quietly said, "Sorry," then walked out after the others. They didn't call the police immediately because, honestly, they were all in shock and also somewhat paranoid. Even though they didn't have drugs, friends did sometimes bring marijuana when they had parties, so they were worried about potential complications. They did eventually report the incident, but nothing ever came of it. No arrests, no follow-ups, just a report filed somewhere in the system. The prevailing theory, which the police seemed to agree with, was that the men were looking for someone else, probably a house down the street or around the block. Maybe someone had moved out, and my friend's group had moved in recently. Or maybe they just received bad information. Either way, it appeared to be a case of mistaken identity. It could have gone so much worse. Nobody got hurt, nothing was stolen, and the gun was never fired. But the psychological impact of that night affected everyone in that house for months afterward. They all became paranoid about every sound, installed multiple locks on the door, and set up a security camera. One of the guys moved out within the year. It was one of those moments where reality just snaps into focus. One second you're sitting in your house relaxing, and the next you have a gun pressed against your neck, wondering if you're going to die over something you know absolutely nothing about. This happened when I was a teenager, probably around 15 or 16 years old. I was spending the night at my best friend's house, and what occurred that night has never made complete sense to either of us. We still discuss it occasionally, just trying to figure out what the hell that person was doing there, or who they even were. My friend lived in a 2-story house with his mother and younger sister. That particular night, it was just the two of us and his mother at home. His little sister was staying with relatives, and his mother had gone to bed early. We were downstairs watching movies and eating junk food, the way we always did during sleepovers. I don't remember exactly what time we finally went to sleep, but it was definitely late, well past midnight for sure. We were both sleeping on couches in the living room. It was completely dark, except for one of those dim kitchen nightlights, providing minimal illumination. I'm naturally a light sleeper, and at some point during the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard what sounded like a door creaking. At first, I thought maybe it was my friend's mother getting up for something, but then I noticed movement near the front of the room. There was a person standing in the hallway, just a silhouette against the kitchen light, so I couldn't make out many details. I could tell it was an adult wearing what looked like a dark hoodie or jacket, and they were standing completely motionless, as if trying to determine whether we were actually asleep. I froze. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not at first, and I didn't want to wake my friend in case I was just being paranoid. But then the figure took a step forward into the room, and I could see them more clearly. They looked surprised, as if they hadn't expected anyone to be there. Then my friend stirred. He must have sensed something was wrong because he sat up and said, "Who the hell are you?" That's when everything went completely sideways. The intruder lunged toward my friend, without saying a single word. It was this weird, panicked moment where nobody knew what was happening. My friend tried to stand up and push the person away, and I jumped to my feet too, but I didn't know what to do. The stranger was already on top of my friend, grabbing at his arm. And then, this is the part that still doesn't make sense, he bit him. Hard. My friend screamed, and I mean really screamed, not just yelled. I pulled the attacker off as best I could, and as soon as I did, he bolted straight out the door. He was gone before we could even register what had just happened. The whole encounter was maybe 30 seconds from start to finish. We immediately locked the door, turned on every light in the house, and woke up his mother. She called the police and took my friend to urgent care. The bite was severe. He needed multiple stitches and antibiotics, but thankfully it healed properly eventually. Police came and took a report, but they never identified who the person was. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. It's possible the door was unlocked, though we honestly can't remember. The only description we could provide was frustratingly vague. Adult male, dark clothing, medium build, maybe in his 30s. Everything happened so fast, and it was too dark to see clearly. We never saw him again, and nothing similar ever happened in that neighborhood as far as we know. The police thought it might have been drug-related, or someone confusing the house for somewhere else. Maybe he thought the place was empty and was planning to steal something. Or maybe he was just mentally unstable. It's the fact that we still don't know what his intentions were that continues to unsettle me. Who breaks into a house, sees two teenagers sleeping in the living room, and their first instinct is to attack one of them by biting. The whole thing has faded into that strange, blurry part of memory where it almost feels like a nightmare. Until you remember the scar on my friend's forearm and the police report that proves it actually happened. This occurred about 2 years ago, and even though it was over within a matter of minutes, I still think about it regularly. Mostly about what could have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. For some background, I was working night shifts at a distribution center at the time, so my sleep schedule was completely reversed. I'd usually get home around 6:30 in the morning, eat something quick, maybe watch a bit of television, and crash by 8 o'clock. This was a Tuesday, middle of the week, nothing out of the ordinary. I was dead asleep when it happened, no dreams, no sounds, nothing that consciously woke me up. Just one of those strange moments where you suddenly open your eyes for no apparent reason. I remember lying there for a few seconds, groggy and disoriented, then getting up to get a drink of water from the kitchen. That's when I saw them. Two men, one kneeling and one standing, both outside my sliding glass door, working on the lock with what appeared to be a screwdriver and maybe a crowbar or some kind of thin prying tool. My kitchen opens directly onto a small backyard, and the sliding glass door is partially concealed by a privacy fence, so it's not easily visible from the street. For a few seconds, I just stood there, half asleep, not fully processing what I was witnessing. I think my brain tried to rationalize it at first, maybe contractors, maybe neighbors. Then it hit me like a shot of caffeine. They were trying to break in, right at that moment, right in the middle of the day. I didn't say anything, just backed up slowly, went to my bedroom, and grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun I kept in the closet for home defense. Still in my underwear, mind you, no shirt, no shoes, but plenty of firepower at my disposal. There I was, just me, my gun, and a rapidly increasing heart rate. I walked back into the kitchen as quietly as possible and opened the side door that leads out to my driveway. As I did, I heard a car horn start honking repeatedly from across the street. Their getaway driver must have spotted me through a window or mirror, because the second that horn started blaring, Both guys immediately abandoned their tools and ran. They didn't even stop to grab the screwdriver. They just took off through the gate and sprinted across the street. I stepped outside, still in my underwear, still holding the shotgun, and watched them jump into an old, beat-up sedan. The driver floored it, tires screeching, and they peeled out so fast I couldn't even get a complete license plate number, just a partial. I didn't fire the weapon, didn't have a reason to, and honestly, I was shaking too much to trust myself with it anyway. But I stood there like a lunatic, barefoot and half naked, watching them disappear into the distance. I called the police after I calmed down. They came out, took a report, and collected the screwdriver the men had dropped. They dusted the sliding door for fingerprints, but didn't find much useful evidence. No real leads, and I never heard any updates after that initial report. The officer explained that this method was typical of quick daytime break-ins target houses that appear empty during work hours. Get in and out as fast as possible. What disturbs me is that they were already halfway through when I woke up. The latch was scratched up, and you could see where the door frame had started to give way. Another 10 minutes, maybe less, and they would have been inside while I was sound asleep. That realization gives me chills every time I think about it. Needless to say, I've made several changes since then, upgraded the locks, reinforced the sliding door, and installed security cameras. Also, I started wearing pajamas to bed, just in case I need to confront intruders again. Stay safe out there. You never know when something like this is going to happen, even if it's the middle of the day, and you think you're just getting up for a glass of water. This happened about 5 years ago, and I've never talked about it online before, but I think about it more than I care to admit. I'm sharing it now because I saw a similar story recently that hit way too close to home. To set the scene, I'm a fairly large guy, 6 feet 3 inches tall, just under 240 pounds. I played football throughout high school and part of college, until an injury ended that chapter. I've stayed in decent shape since then, not for sports, just because I like feeling strong and capable. I never thought I'd end up using that strength the way I did that night. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning on a weeknight. I live alone in a 1-story house in a quiet suburban area, not far from where I grew up. I was sound asleep when I heard a loud clunk, followed by what sounded like glass cracking. At first, I thought something might have fallen in the kitchen, maybe a plate or something from a shelf, until I heard footsteps. These weren't cautious, tiptoeing footsteps. They were confident, deliberate footsteps. That's when the adrenaline hit hard. I didn't yell or turn on any lights. I got out of bed, grabbed the small metal baseball bat I keep underneath it. Yeah, not ideal, but it's what I had available and crept toward the hallway. When I peered around the corner, I saw a man I didn't recognize standing in my living room. He was wearing a hoodie and gloves, carrying a flashlight and going through my backpack. He hadn't noticed me yet. This is where everything just snapped. I wasn't thinking clearly. It felt like one of those fight or flight moments, and I chose to fight. I sprinted at him and tackled him with full force. Honestly, the hardest I've ever hit anyone in my life. He didn't see it coming at all. I caught him square in the ribs and drove him into the floor. The sound he made when we hit the ground was awful. You could hear the wind get knocked out of him completely. He started yelling and trying to squirm away, but I had a knee on his back and was shouting for someone to call the police. I'd left my phone in the bedroom, so I was hoping a neighbor would hear the commotion. Fortunately, someone did hear the noise and had already called 911. The intruder tried to fight back, but I outweighed him significantly, and he was in bad shape from the initial impact. I didn't hit him again after the tackle, but I didn't let him up either. I just stayed on top of him, breathing hard, keeping one of his arms twisted behind his back, until the police arrived maybe 5 or 6 minutes later. It felt like an hour. It turns out I broke 2 of his ribs and fractured his orbital bone from that tackle. He was carrying a screwdriver and had a folding knife in his hoodie pocket. Neither weapon was drawn when I found him, but they were definitely there. Police discovered he had entered through my kitchen window by prying it open with a crowbar, which he'd left outside. He had a criminal record, 2 prior convictions for burglary and a drug charge. They charged him with felony burglary, possession of burglary tools, and several other offenses. I had to testify later, which was uncomfortable. Seeing him in court after everything was surreal. He looked smaller and more pathetic than I remembered. He was sentenced to 6 years, with no possibility of parole for the first 4, because it was his 3rd strike. He didn't say anything during the sentencing, just stared at the floor. I still have mixed feelings about the whole situation. I don't regret what I did. He broke into my home while I was sleeping, after all. But the experience made me realize how quickly things can escalate and go completely sideways. I keep thinking, what if he'd had a gun? What if I hadn't woken up in time? What if I had hesitated for even a few seconds? Since then, I've upgraded my security cameras, reinforced doors, better locks. I also got some legal advice and training, just in case I have to deal with something like this again. If you've ever thought that kind of thing doesn't happen in your area, trust me, it can happen anywhere. And it feels very different when it's happening in your house, in your space, with your life potentially on the line. I've been putting off sharing this story for a while, because I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it. Several months have passed since it happened, but the unease still sits in the pit of my stomach like a cold stone. I'm a 27-year-old woman who lives alone in a small townhouse, tucked away on a quiet street. It's a nice neighborhood, not a lot of foot traffic, mostly families and elderly neighbors. I've always felt safe there, and I've always been reasonably vigilant about security. Motion lights, a couple of cameras, a doorbell cam. I always lock up, check windows, and I make sure to lock the bathroom door when I shower, even though nobody else is around. One Saturday, I was home alone cleaning and catching up on laundry. I decided to take a long, hot shower around 6 o'clock in the evening. I was in there for about 15 minutes, maybe a bit longer, just trying to relax after a busy week. The bathroom is pretty small, and the shower is in the corner next to the only window in the room. I'm not typically paranoid about someone sneaking up on me while I'm showering, but I always check the blinds just to be sure. I did the same thing this time. When I finished and got out, though, I felt off. I couldn't quite place it at first, but there was this strange feeling in the air, like something had shifted or changed while I was distracted by the running water. I quickly wrapped a towel around myself and walked back to the bathroom door. That's when I noticed it. The door, which I always keep locked when I'm in the shower, was slightly ajar. I froze. I was pretty sure I had locked it, but now I wasn't completely certain. I stepped out into the hallway, glancing around the apartment. The place was silent, and nothing seemed obviously out of place, but I still felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I was about to go check the door lock again when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small, muddy footprint on the carpet, right in front of my bathroom door. It was still fresh, still damp. I immediately panicked. My first thought was to check all the windows. Nothing looked disturbed, but that didn't make me feel any better. Someone had definitely been inside my apartment. I called a friend, and she talked me down somewhat, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there watching me while I was completely vulnerable. I decided to check my security camera footage, just to reassure myself that no one had entered through the front door or back gate. What I saw made my stomach drop completely. The camera facing the front door had recorded normal footage of me walking toward the bathroom, just like any other day. But then, after a few minutes, I watched a figure enter the frame. It was a man tall, wearing all black clothing. He walked up to the front porch, paused for a moment, then turned around to go around the side of the house. The camera didn't record him actually entering through the door, but it did catch a glimpse of his figure moving past the frame right after I had gone into the bathroom. Somehow, he had gotten inside while I was showering. I immediately called the police. They came and conducted a thorough sweep of the house. They didn't find anyone, but they confirmed that the lock on my back door had been tampered with. The door frame was slightly scratched, as though someone had tried to force it open and eventually succeeded. There were also a couple of handprints on a window that I hadn't noticed before. Here's the scariest part. I showed the officer footage from the previous day, and to my absolute horror and disbelief, we watched as the same man in black clothes entered the frame at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. This meant he had been watching me, learning my routine. The officer asked if I had a regular schedule, and I felt a ringing in my ears as I told him that yes. I usually took a shower at 6 o'clock after returning from work. He explained that it appeared the intruder only entered when I was in the bathroom. The police believed he had been watching me from outside, waiting for the right moment when I was most vulnerable, then quietly slipping in when I was distracted by the water. Ever since then, I've been much more vigilant, and I even moved out to stay with a friend for several weeks. I also installed better locks and upgraded my entire security system. But the thought of someone watching, waiting for that specific moment when I was completely unaware and defenseless, it chills me to the bone every time I think about it. I still don't know how he knew exactly what time I showered every day. The police suggested that I cover the bathroom window completely and consider whether anyone I'd had a close relationship with might be doing this. I had a few ex-boyfriends, but I hadn't been in contact with any of them for quite some time. Honestly, this whole experience keeps me awake at night, and I've decided to move as soon as I can get out of my lease. The idea that someone was studying my habits, planning when to invade my most private moments, it's something I don't think I'll ever fully get over. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.